Call this meeting to order. Bonjour à tous. Le Comité permanent de Finance.
Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. The Standing Committee on Finance is holding its 38th meeting. On the orders of the day, we have the Pre-Budget Consultations 2010. And we have 7 organizations on this panel: the Canadian Museums Association, the Direct Sellers Association of Canada, Magazines Canada, the Canadian Urban Transit Association, the CPQ or Quebec Employers Council, Heritage Canada Foundation, and Imagine Canada. Welcome to this committee. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, and we will get underway with the Canadian Museums Association.
Mr. Chair, we are very honored to be here today to present to you on behalf of museums. I would like to make note at the beginning that my presentation today will be more focused and a bit briefer than our brief was. We have chosen to, in fact, focus on one issue and one issue only. To begin, I would like to reference this committee's report from last year. During your consultations, you made a recommendation that the government undertake a study on museum policy and funding. We very much thank you for this interest in Canadian museums and for this recommendation. And it would be very useful to turn back to this recommendation to see what progress has been made. I think we can begin by saying that Budget 2011 will be a difficult one in many respects. We recognize that it will need to strike a fine balance between spending and restraint as the government begins to address the deficit that's accumulated in order to fight the recession. This will translate, we all know, into difficult choices in 2011 and 12 and beyond. Today, we come before you with a creative and innovative proposal, which is basically how the Government of Canada can help museums to help themselves. We understand the fiscal context in which the government currently operates and in which Budget 2011 will be tabled. Accordingly, our input to this consultation is strategic, sensible, and practical, and our single recommendation is modest, which will provide an enduring self-reliance rather than greater dependence. This committee may be surprised to hear words such as strategic, sensible, and practical come from an organization in the arts and cultural sector. You may even be shocked to hear the words greater self-reliance rather than greater dependence from government, from an arts organization. We are here today not to ask the government to fund art for art's sake or for entitlement support, or to ask the government for a handout. We are here with an innovative initiative that could help reframe and redefine the relationship with this sector from the government. We are here today to invite the government to invest in a new program to increase private sector support for museums called the Canadians Supporting Their Museums Fund. This fund would match money raised by museums from the private sector on a dollar-for-dollar basis to an annual ceiling. We call for this to be a 5-year pilot with an annual budget of $25 million. This would be a wonderful case of museums working with the government hand in hand in partnership to increase private sector investments in museums and our long-term stability. We also think this initiative will be well aligned with other current areas of government, namely addressing the country's productivity and innovation gap. Today, private donations to museums represent just 9% of their operating budgets. Despite a reduction in both individual and corporate taxes in recent years, donations to museums have not seen a substantial increase. At the same time, studies show that programs such as the one that we propose, namely the Canadians Supporting Their Museum Fund, are powerful incentives for existing private donors and non-donors to increase their donations to charities. We need to create the right conditions for Canadians to donate more robustly to their museums and galleries, enabling museums to improve their earned revenues and their long-term stability. Our overall objective would be to increase private donations for cash and securities from 9% to between 15% and 20% of their operations.
1 minute.
1 minute. From our studies, an impressive 45%, almost 50%, of Canadians are more likely to donate if a donation is matched by the federal government. Further, among those who have never donated, a full 35% are more likely to donate if there is a matching case. We will be bringing this idea to Parliament Hill on November 23rd in meetings with members of Parliament to celebrate Museums Day. But in conclusion, I would like to say that we believe this proposal is congruent with the priorities and productivity and innovation set by this government, that this proposal is conceived in the spirit of greater self-sufficiency, and that it is designed to strengthen museums as important cornerstones to our society. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation. Next, the Direct Sellers Association of Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, on behalf of the 50-member companies of the Direct Sellers Association, which includes such well-known names as Avon, Mary Kay, Amway, Tupperware, and the 900,000 independent sales contractors and employees across Canada, I want to thank you for the opportunity to participate in this consultation. Direct selling companies and their independent sales contractors market a wide variety of products directly to the consumer, usually in the consumer's home rather than in a traditional retail establishment or other fixed places of business. In 2008, the Canadian direct selling industry recorded retail sales of $2.2 billion, an increase of 11.5% over the previous 5 years, and contributed $815 million in total national and local taxes. The direct selling industry also contributes to community growth and improvement through its charitable donations, with member companies contributing $7.7 million in 2008. Our independent sales contractors' sense of community is reinforced through their generosity to charities, with 91% of our direct sellers making personal contributions to charities that same year. The direct selling industry provides accessible business opportunities to all Canadians without restrictions with respect to gender, age, education, knowledge, or previous experience. A 2008 socioeconomic impact study found that 8% of ISCs were unemployed before starting their direct selling business. 1/3 of them maintained their businesses as a primary work opportunity or source of income. The balance used direct selling as a source of additional or secondary income, with 90% of the ISCs in Canada being women. I think we can all agree that Canada's economy fared better than most during the economic downturn. Despite that, we are still in a delicate process of economic recovery, and many Canadians still find themselves either out of work or in need of additional income. With fewer full and part-time jobs available, Canadians continue to look for other options to meet income needs, including direct selling. The direct selling industry has met the needs of thousands of Canadians who find themselves in these difficult situations by assisting in and promoting entrepreneurial activity. Direct selling offers flexibility of hours, training, education, and support for running a business. It offers a wide variety of earning situations and the opportunity of maintaining or returning to a meaningful and fulfilling standard of living. The direct selling industry also has an unlimited capacity to transform individuals who are dependent on social programs such as employment insurance into successful small business entrepreneurs. The DSA supports improvements to federal and provincial employment programs that encourages individuals transitioning from dependence on EI to independence. For our part, the DSA has been working with officials at HRSDC to ensure that direct selling is recognized by HRSDC and the provinces as a legitimate form of self-employment, as it has been for many years by Finance Canada, the Canada Revenue Agency, and the Competition Bureau. We believe more needs to be done to communicate these messages to the provinces to ensure there are no artificial disincentives to pursuing direct selling as a legitimate form of self-employment. And the DSA will also engage the provincial ministries on this matter. I should also acknowledge our industry's appreciation of the measures introduced by Minister Finlay to extend EI special benefits to the self-employed. For many in our industry, these changes provide increased financial security and flexibility as they pursue their entrepreneurial goals. The other item I will briefly address deals with the GST collection mechanism used by our industry. The GST direct sellers mechanism, as we have stated during many appearances before this committee, is an example of government and business working in partnership to develop a policy that has been beneficial to both. The direct sellers mechanism enacted in 1991 is based on pre-collection and remittance of GST by the direct selling companies themselves on the suggested retail price, thereby removing a considerable burden from both the ISCs and the CRA. Changes to the DSM in the 2009 federal budget made it available to the 20 to 25% of the industry which operates on an independent sales representative as opposed to a buy-resell basis. We appreciate this committee's support for this important tax change and are pleased to tell the committee that companies have begun to process to enter the mechanism. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, we are an industry that touches the lives of Canadians from coast to coast to coast by giving them an opportunity to work, to learn, to prosper, and to grow. And on behalf of the Direct Sellers Association, I want to thank you very much for this opportunity to appear before you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now hear from Magazines Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your time today, everyone. Magazines Canada is the national trade association representing the $2.2 billion Canadian content magazine media. Our members create consumer, cultural, specialty, professional, and business media titles. There are over 2,000 Canadian magazine titles in French, English, Aboriginal, and other languages, in print and through a growing number of new digital delivery platforms. These magazines are based in all parts of Canada and are mainly small businesses. The industry creates work for 15,000 people. These are creative, good quality jobs. When they buy magazines, Canadians spend more than 40% of their purchases on Canadian titles, so Canada's policy to help make Canadian content accessible is truly working. I'd like to say that this success results entirely from the creative talent and acumen of the industry, but that wouldn't be correct. Effective federal policy, public policy, and programs have played a very important role. However, new technologies and the digital age are changing everything. We all know that policies and programs focused on yesterday's needs will not create the jobs and economic growth we need today and tomorrow. They must be designed for the digital economy. Recognizing this, the industry worked with Minister Moore and his department to update the programs that invest in Canadian content development. The new Canada Periodical Fund is the result. Now in its first year of operation, the new program is well suited to the digital age, better targeted, and more efficient to administer. It helps move the industry ahead from just supporting postal costs to a more flexible footing where each magazine brand can tailor its editorial and delivery strategies to the needs of Canadian readers, whether it be print, digital subscription, mobile apps, digital tablets, newsstand sales, or other as yet undiscovered platforms. The New Canada Periodical Fund, or CPF, is an effective new tool that Canada's magazines can use to manage risk and meet world competition in the new evolving digital environment. Minister Moore and his colleagues have put in place a new program that will serve the needs of Canadian readers and promote Canadian content in the digital age. The issue from a point of view of planning for 2011 federal budget concerns the financial support. Magazines Canada urges the Government of Canada to maintain its commitment to the Canadian Periodical Program at a level of $75 million per year for the next 5 years. This is not a call for increased support. This is the level of funding that has been in place for many years and which is currently investing in about 925 magazines and community newspapers across Canada. Over the past year, Minister Moore and the government have taken action to commit multi-year budgets for cultural programs. We applaud this approach. The predictability of these programs is important to planning for magazines too, particularly as they launch into new ventures to access readers online and through new digital applications. We are confident that the new program over time at the same budget will deliver similar results. It will provide Canadian readers access to Canadian content on multiple digital platforms. It will promote development of digital applications and delivery systems. It will create new jobs and investment in the creative sector. It is helping now create more Canadian content on multiple digital platforms and opportunities for our writers, designers, photographers to reach beyond traditional audiences at home and abroad. We ask that you support our recommendation that this new updated program receive a multi-year commitment. We have provided the committee with our pre-budget submission, and we would be pleased to answer any questions. Thank you again for your time today.
Thank you for your presentation. We'll now hear from the Canadian Urban Transit Association.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it goes without saying that public transit supports the access of Canadians to jobs, to schools, to shopping, to recreation, but transit is also emerging as a key solution to economic competitiveness, urban congestion, clean air, and healthy living. The public transit industry fully recognizes the economic challenges we face today, along with the fiscal realities that governments must tackle in the coming years. Nonetheless, it's now more important than ever that specific financial commitments to transit infrastructure are seen for what they are, a critical investment in the economy we must build for current and future generations. Une récente analyse estime à plus de 10 milliards de dollars.
A recent study estimates $10 billion in annual economic spin-offs from the public transit in Canada, representing close to 1% of GDP.
Who last month stated categorically that improvements to public transit have a real long-term positive economic impact. Indeed, according to the Prime Minister, of all the solutions, public transit is the best. It is one area where smart infrastructure investments can make a big difference. Well, needless to say, I couldn't agree more. In addition, the transit industry directly employs over 45,000 Canadians and indirectly creates an additional 24,000 jobs. Canadians across the country have benefited significantly from key federal transit investments. The Canada Line in Vancouver, Edmonton's light rail extensions, GO Transit in Toronto, Le Métro de Montréal, and Metrolinx Bus Rapid Transit in Halifax, just to name a few. But it's not just the big cities that have benefited. Small communities have also been able to expand and revitalize their systems from federal support. And that has meant an awful lot to those communities. Il est clair que les citoyens ont depuis longtemps.
Clearly, citizens have for the longest time adopted public transit. The increase in the number of users and travels are proof of this. It is important that increased demand be supported by predictable and long-term investments.
Report after report shows that traffic congestion is costing our urban economies billions of dollars every year. CUDA's most recent national survey identifies the transit infrastructure investment needs at $53 billion over the next 5 years. Now, about 70% of that can be covered from existing sources, which is much better than it used to be. But the question remains, how do we bridge the gap? If we assume that this investment might be shared equally across the three orders of government, it implies a federal portion of about $6 billion of additional investment, admittedly at a time of extreme fiscal constraints, as I know all too well that we have to work on eliminating the deficit. Il est possible de combler les écarts de financement.
It is possible to bridge the funding gap in a strategic manner through a dedicated funding. In its next budget, the federal government should present a 5-year funding plan in which investments would be spread out, taking into account the economic progressive recovery. In such a scenario, investments would be more modest during the first year and would grow proportionally as the economy recovers and the deficit shrinks.
CUDA has pursued the idea of tax-exempt status for employer-provided transit benefits. This would level the playing field between transit and free parking and encourage employers to offer a choice between driving and transit. Many studies have shown the benefits are tangible and immediate, and at a relatively low cost. Ladies and gentlemen, let me close with this. Recognizing that the future is shaped with long-term views and bold leadership, CUDA has developed a 30-year blueprint for the future of transport in our cities and communities. We call it Transit Vision 2040. It's a 6-point plan that sets the course for public transit to maximize its contribution to quality of life. The first of these points is the development of a Canadian transit policy framework designed in collaboration with provincial, territorial and municipal governments, and with a long-term, sustainable and predictable funding mechanism, we can all move forward to build a better Canada for the future. That way, ladies and gentlemen, we wouldn't need to come back to you every year with a new request. Now is the time to be bold. Now is the time to be leaders. Now is the time to take action. The Government of Canada can respond and demonstrate leadership in this critical area. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation. Ensuite, le Conseil du...
And now the CPQ, the Quebec Employers Council. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We are pleased to appear before you and present our recommendations. I will give a brief overview, of course, of our concerns and our suggestions for the next budget. The CPQ, or Quebec Employers Council, represents employers in Quebec in all industries. First of all, with regard to continuing to curb growth in operating expenses in order to reduce the deficit and rebalance the budget, we believe that rebalancing the budget as quickly as possible is a top priority. The government has already announced in its 2010 budget its intent to review all government programs to reduce operating expenses for federal budgets with a view to achieving this goal. We congratulate the government on this initiative and we encourage it to keep up its efforts in this area. Allow me to say a few words with regard to healthcare spending. For the 2010 budget, we had pointed out that the federal government's efforts were all the more impressive since it announced its intent not to touch transfer and equalization payments. Quebec counts on these payments to provide the health and education services under its jurisdiction. Of course, healthcare spending is assumed by the provinces. As we begin to look beyond 2014, we believe that the idea of linking transfer payments for healthcare to inflation and democratic growth is not the best way to proceed. Such a formula does not take into account the need for new therapies that may be more expensive in the long term, but cost-effective in the long term. The current formula completely disregards demographic distribution. It is common knowledge that health care costs rise as people get older, and the population is aging more quickly in Quebec than elsewhere in Canada. Now, continuing with Canada's Economic Action Plan, the CPQ believes that the federal government should end most of the measures under Canada's Economic Action Plan. However, we do insist that the federal government show some flexibility with regard to infrastructure work that might not be completed by March 31st, 2011. As those budgets have already been planned, perhaps there could be an extension until June 30th, 2011 on condition that the work begins no later than December 31st, 2010, with regard to corporate taxation and payroll taxes.
On its plan to reduce corporate income tax to 15% for 2012. Cette baisse entraînera davantage d'investissements privés.
This tax reduction would increase private investments, both domestic and foreign, which would enhance our productivity, create good jobs, and improve living conditions for Canadians.
Insurance. On September 30th, Canada's Minister of Finance, the Honourable Jim Flaherty, announced new employment insurance contribution rates for the next 3 years. For employers, they represent an increase of 7 cents for each 100 in insurable earnings for 2011 and 14 cents for the following years. Avant d'augmenter les cotisations à l'assurance d'emploi.
Before EI premiums are increased in the future, we believe the benefits of the EI program and the funding model should be reviewed. A more balanced cost structure, 50-50 employer-employee versus the current 60-40, is now more necessary than ever. If the government is not willing to institute this change, it should strongly consider gradually increasing its own contributions in order to keep employer contributions at a reasonable level. For instance, 40% employer, 40% employee, and 20% government. Reintroducing government EI contributions is also justified by the government's decision in the past to transfer EI surpluses to the consolidated fund. As we have often said, the EI program covers benefits that are more or like fringe benefits and have nothing to do with insurance. With regard to training of the labor force, the CPQ believes that the government should consider new ways to increase the effectiveness of funding for EI training programs. One part of these funds should be spent on recognizing skills and providing training in the workplace. We also believe that there should be more dedicated funding and perhaps creating EI contribution credit for employers who offer training programs. With regard to business assistance, the CPQ believes that within the same budget, focusing business assistance efforts in the following 4 areas will produce significant results. First of all, with projects to increase productivity, projects to create added value, 3, projects to improve product or service marketing, especially in less traditional markets, and 4, projects to improve environmental performance. With regard to innovation, now, for example, the government could implement tax credits and procurement policies to encourage marketing and innovation and existing clean technologies in order to accelerate their implementation in Canada and their export around the world. Finally, just a word on the National Securities Commission.
Okay. Merci, Monsieur Dorval.
Mr. Dorval? I think you'll be getting questions on that issue later on. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, distinguished committee members, thank you for this opportunity to present our recommendations. The Heritage Canada Foundation is a national, non-governmental, charitable entity created as Canada's National Trust. We believe that historic places are the cornerstones of community and national identity and the key to a sustainable future. We are seeking measures to stimulate private investment in the rehabilitation of historic buildings. This is truly work worth doing on many levels. Rehabilitation creates new jobs because rehabilitation is 66% more labor-intensive than new construction. Further, rehabilitation projects and the jobs they create have been shown to increase tax and tourism revenue and have a positive ripple effect in surrounding areas. Think of places like the Saint-Roch district in Quebec City, Edmonton's Old Strathcona district, or Toronto's Distillery district. We also know that measures to encourage the rehabilitation of existing buildings will have important environmental benefits. The greenest building is the one that's already built. New construction, no matter how green, cannot compete with the environmental imperative of wisely using the buildings that we already have. Yet rising land values and development pressure in urban areas encourage demolition and new construction. And many important historic buildings owned and operated by nonprofit organizations are at serious risk due to lack of funding. We need measures that would assist and reward businesses that invest in existing buildings, as well as measures that support the efforts of nonprofit owners and encourage charitable donations. Our first recommendation is inspired by special measures already in place in Canada to encourage private sector preservation of Canada's environmental heritage, namely Environment Canada's Eco-Gifts program. In contrast, there is currently no tax measure to encourage private sector action for another type of national treasure, Canada's heritage buildings. In fact, the tax system contains powerful disincentives to preservation. For example, the GST new housing rebate favors demolition and new construction and does not accommodate the careful renovation of existing buildings. The unpredictable tax treatment of rehabilitation expenses can result in a variance of as much as 60% in a project balance sheet, which deters investors. And worse, owners of income-producing properties, including houses and apartment buildings, can actually earn a federal tax deduction by demolishing those buildings. Accordingly, our first recommendation is to introduce a federal rehabilitation tax incentive for heritage properties in Canada. Rehabilitation tax credits have been hugely successful in the United States for over 30 years. In fact, the U.S. Historic Tax Credit Program was introduced as an economic stimulus measure in the 1970s and has since leveraged over $25 billion in private investment and created an average of 45 new jobs per project. There's broad support in Canada for such a measure, notably from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada. The cost of such a program to government can be managed through eligibility criteria and or by setting ceilings on the amount of credit available per property owner. Our second recommendation is to build on the success of 2009 funding provided to Parks Canada's National Historic Sites of Canada cost-sharing program. The cost-sharing program provided up to 50% of eligible costs incurred in the conservation of national historic sites. The program has stimulated private investment in a number of historic sites that will yield spin-off economic activity in addition to the construction costs incurred. Sites like the Toronto Power Generation Station at Niagara Falls, the Atlas No. 3 coal mine in Drumheller, Alberta, and the Légaré Mill National Historic Site of Canada at Saint-Eustache, Quebec. There has been very strong demand for this program, and the modest $20 million made available is already fully committed. In fact, applications were received for over 200 sites, seeking a total of $53 million in funding, and those projects, if they had all been approved, would have leveraged an impressive $300 million in construction investment. So we recommend that government continue to fund this program with at least $10 to $20 million per year, or even better, to reprofile it as a National Heritage Conservation Endowment Fund. And this recommendation is inspired by the Canadian government's significant investment in cost-share funding for the Land Trust movement in 2007. It's also based on our knowledge of U.S. public-private partnerships such as Save America's Treasures, established by the White House with seed money from Congress and successfully attracting funds from individuals, businesses, and foundations. In closing, thank you very much for considering our two recommendations, which represent proven approaches to leveraging private sector investment and making heritage and older buildings the cornerstones of a sustainable economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ball. We'll now hear from Imagine Canada, please.
Monsieur le Président, chers membres du comité,
Mr. Chairman, committee members, Imagine Canada is a national umbrella organization for Canadian charities and nonprofits. These organizations work in every community across Canada and in countries around the world to help address some of today's most intractable social, economic, environmental, and cultural challenges. Charities and nonprofits are a major economic resource. We employ 2 million Canadians and mobilize more than 12 million volunteers each year. We also contribute 7% of GDP, much more than, for example, the automotive industry.
charities and nonprofits continue to be on the front line of responding to growing and changing community needs. However, like other economic sectors, our sector has been affected by the recession. Donations as well as government support from all levels have decreased. The pressure is on to further diversify our income streams. In our brief, we make 3 recommendations. First, we recommend the adoption of a stretch tax credit that would apply to new and increased charitable giving on the part of individual Canadians. The proposal was endorsed by the Finance Committee here last year, and we hope that it will receive serious consideration in the 2011 budget. The stretch tax credit would expand the donor base and help existing donors to give more by adding 10% onto the standard charitable tax credit for every dollar in excess of a person's previous highest donation level. It would apply from the first dollar donated, encouraging all Canadians from all walks of life, of all income levels, to stretch their giving. If someone, for example, increased their donation from, let's say, $250 up to $350 next year, they would get a 39% tax credit on that extra $100 rather than the 29%. We believe that the stretch tax credit would lead to changes in behavior and would be a better public investment than simply boosting the tax credit overall. This would be a powerful message to Canadians that anyone in Canada can actually be a philanthropist. A vital component of adopting the stretch tax credit would actually be public education. Every year, Canadians would be informed of their eligibility for the enhanced credit. This could be accomplished in a very similar way as the way we inform people of their RRSP contribution limits, and would encourage Canadians to consciously assess and plan for their charitable giving. This would be, I think, a great step forward. The stretch tax credit is about building and strengthening the donor base for decades to come. However, donations are not the most important revenue source for the charitable and nonprofit sector. Self-generated income accounts for around half of the sector's revenue. This is where our second recommendation comes into effect. We know that many organizations have great ideas about how to expand their entrepreneurial activities. However, they don't always have the expertise or financial resources to turn their good ideas into reality. The federal government already has a number of initiatives that actually helps SMEs get off the ground. Assistance is available for everything from early business and market planning to securing capital and scaling up successful ventures. Programs like the Business Development Bank, Community Futures Corporations, and RAP do excellent work with private entrepreneurs. Despite the important economic contribution of charities and nonprofits, I would remind you, 7% of GDP, it is not clear why charities and nonprofits cannot get similar federal assistance. We therefore recommend that the federal government put social entrepreneurs and nonprofits on an even footing with other entrepreneurs. We are not asking for more money for business development programs, just that we be given equal access to these programs at a time when these are really needed. As I already mentioned, we are one of the largest economic sectors in Canada, and we believe that more can and should be done to support the sector. And finally, we have a recommendation that is more technical and regulatory in nature, one that would reduce costs for charities without any significant cost to government. As things stand today, decisions by the Canada Revenue Agency to deny or revoke charitable status are subject to review in the first instance by the Federal Court of Canada. This is an expensive and cumbersome process, and moreover does not allow for the introduction of new evidence. It seriously limits charities' ability to appeal decisions. Il y a plusieurs années, la table conjointe sur la réglementation.
Several years ago, the Joint Regulatory Table recommended that the tax court become the first level of appeal. This would be a much simpler, cheaper, and more accessible way of doing business. The federal court would still be available as a higher level of appeal. We are therefore recommending that this reform, which has already been examined and endorsed, be implemented. This would greatly strengthen the regulatory environment for charities. Thank you once again, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions you might have.
Members' questions of Mr. Szabo, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the museum, Canadian Museum Association, the recommendation of creating this new Canada Museum Fund, which includes the matching, the $25 million dollar-for-dollar matching. Can you? We're basically reprofiling existing funding envelopes. Can you just summarize or clarify how this reprofiling, including the matching, will affect other initiatives that the Museum Association had that may not get the same level of support?
At present, the Department of Canadian Heritage offers a variety of programs, which are mostly individual standalone programs. And reprofiling is an excellent word that you have used. Our suggestion is that these need to be brought up to date. They are currently not meeting the needs of the museum community. The programs need to be refreshed, be made more efficient. Many of them are bogged down in great administrative burden that's required for reporting, let alone application processes. So we believe that there are opportunities here to streamline the programs to make them more cost-effective and more efficient. In addition, by bringing those together into, as it were, a single portal, it'll be much more user-friendly to museums and art galleries and so on across Canada. We do make the recommendation of adding this new program to support private sector donations. Currently, culture is at the very bottom of the heap of charitable giving in Canada. This is something that we would very much actively like to change, and we think we can do it. Museums are well supported and looked to by Canadians, highly respected, 96% approval ratings, and we believe that we've got an opportunity that we would like to move on. Thank you.
I'd like to just ask you very briefly about the Young Canada Works in Museums, the basically apprenticeship and summer jobs in a sector of young people that's not in good shape. How are we doing there, or what can we do? What's the dimensions of the assistance here?
That program is currently a total of $7 million, and it works very nicely. It is administered outside of government by third-party delivery and is run very efficiently at a 9.6% overhead, which is well within the Blue Ribbon Report's recommendations. One area of concern that we have is that there's a component for internships for graduates of universities, and that program is oversubscribed, and we are having to turn down 92% of the applications to that program.
Wow.
We've asked for, last year, Mr. Flaherty in the budget added $30 million for youth internships, which is wonderful news, but unfortunately none of that money came over to museums. So that is a very big area of concern for us.
Thank you. That's extremely helpful. It's an opportunity. I guess I wanted to deal with direct sellers. First of all, to say thank you for all the years of coming to Parliament Hill. It's
well known to parliamentarians, and we've got an opportunity to meet so many of the people who are involved with the various selling groups. And when you talk about employing full or part-time 900,000 Canadians, it's not insignificant and much appreciated. Your recommendation is a generic one, though. Is there anything specific that you feel would enhance the progress that you've been able to make in the past?
Well, thank you for your very positive comments, and it's always been our pleasure to be on the Hill to welcome parliamentarians. I think you're right, it is a generic one. We're not asking for any funding. What we're looking for is to increase the awareness within especially the provinces who are delivering the EI programs, that direct selling is recognized as a legitimate form of self-employment. We worked through the minister's office to put that in place in the federal area, but we are going to have to do that on a province-by-province basis.
Thank you very much. I just have 2 minutes left. I wanted to just skip over to Imagine Canada. Your organization has been invoked by a number of groups already before us, and the stretch tax credit issue, which I think members are getting more familiar with. As a result of all the feedback that you've heard so far and discussions with your group, have you got any more information about how this fits, the equity that it brings, and whether or not it's going to be the most strategic or effective way to promote first-time giving or increased giving by those who give modestly?
Well, to be frank, this is, it's an innovative measure. It's never been tried before, never been tried elsewhere. It is very much about trying to change behavior. We feel, for example, that if you were simply to increase the tax credit, it would cost government more money and you wouldn't actually see any more given, most probably. This one here, I think, would be a real incentive and a way for us to get a message to Canadians of all income levels that they should be giving. I think it would make a difference for both first-time donors and people who have donated for a number of years but perhaps could do a bit more. It has all kinds of indirect benefits because we know that people who donate also get engaged in their community. So in that sense, we think it would be a really important measure. That would actually, the other aspect, I guess, I would reinforce is the public education aspect of it. If this were to go through, as I was saying in my presentation, CRA would have to tell each tax filer how much eligibility they have for the stretch. That in itself, I think, would make it really, really enticing for people to start thinking and planning for their giving in the long term.
And very quickly, Canada, for the magazines, Canadian Periodical Fund, the request for the, I guess, the confirmation of the $75.5 million of funding for a 5-year period. What is the current situation there, and why are you asking for this?
The current situation is that funding is in place. It is a result of bringing together the Publications Assistance Program and the Canada Magazine Fund under one umbrella called the Canada Periodical Fund. The challenge, of course, is in the budgeting is that $15 million of that is potentially at risk because it was put in as part of the Economic Action Program and not in the core funding. So while it is a carryover fund, it has been split into another pot, if you will.
Okay, but you're asking for the full.
We'd like to continue with the as per years gone by.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Zabo. Monsieur Payet, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Payet, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for the representatives of the CPQ, Quebec Employers Council. I believe you've appropriately underscored the fact, and this doesn't come from socialists or communists here, it comes from the CPQ, the Employers Council, that healthcare transfers should not be tied to inflation, but rather tied to the number of people who are covered and demographic growth. You also indicated that the harmonization of the sales tax was already something of the past in Quebec, and that Quebec should receive fair compensation. And I believe that you show a great dose of reality by saying that the March 31st deadline should perhaps be extended so that all the renovation or infrastructure work could be carried out. I'd like to thank you for that and for having pointed it out. But you also point out on page 4 and 5 of your brief, with regard to business assistance, you have there a number of elements. And in the following paragraph, you seem to be saying that the recovery isn't the same across Canada, and therefore there are sectors of the economy that have not yet recovered. And so my question to you is, am I going too far in saying that if we cut off infrastructure funding, and given that some sectors are experiencing difficulty, that might stall those sectors which are more vulnerable? Well, out of principle, when the government established its economic action plan, given the economic circumstances, it did indicate that it was a temporary measure. We believe that temporary measures should remain so. Once they've contributed to increase or to achieve part of our objectives, they should be stopped and transformed. There are sectors or areas of intervention where that could be different. In the forestry industry, for instance, that sector was affected not only by the recession, there's a structural problem in that industry, namely in Quebec. And so what we are saying is that with regard to the forest industry, it is important to be concerned by certain sectors in particular, including the forest industry, with the amount of jobs that it represents and the impact that it has on Quebec's regions. There are a number of Quebec regions, namely the Mauricie, which is the region with the highest level of unemployment. So things aren't the same across the board in Quebec. Some regions are more harshly affected, and it must be the same in other provinces. So, therefore, we need to have put special emphasis on certain sectors, the forest industry as well as the aerospace industry. When we saw the recession coming, we saw the impact that that had on the purchasing orders, and that takes a time to come back. And so I think we not only need an overall plan that affects all sectors, but we have to make sure that in certain industries that are more affected than others, that we pay careful attention to them, and that in future budgets we pay special consideration. So we should get rid of a one-size-fits-all approach. You know, I listen with great interest to the committee chair, and so I have a question for you in paragraph 7. You know, the National Securities Commission. A few days ago, before our committee, we had Mr. Jan Russell, who represented the Canadian securities brokers, and I asked him about his organization, an organization that deals with the International Securities Organization. And regulations and tariffs have been harmonized, and I basically said that he represents an association or an industry in Canada that functions properly. And he says that's true, exactly. So you seem to be of the same opinion, and it'd be interesting to hear that from Mr. Russell. It was interesting. But what I find somewhat puzzling is that we are somewhat concerned by the negative impacts this move could have on Quebec's financial industry and economy. Some believe that it's not wanting a unique securities regulator is not a serious position. But I mean, you yourselves are not socialists, but you talk about negative impacts on the industry and the financial sector in Quebec. Could you go a bit further into detail? Well, yes. This is in response to perhaps foreign investors who find Canada's securities regulations a bit too complex. However, I believe that Canada's financial industry's reputation is excellent, so I don't think we have to struggle to raise our visibility. But clearly, in Quebec and in Montreal, there are many jobs that are tied to the securities industry. And we're talking about high-level jobs with very interesting wages. And those jobs are often related to the closeness of decisional centers, namely in that sector. And so for us, it appears clear that the financial sector in Montreal would be affected, negatively impacted, and especially for high-quality jobs. And for an economy like Montreal's, I don't think we have the means to lose those jobs, and we don't have the means to lose those jobs if there isn't a greater added value. So for you, the closeness of the decisional centers is an important principle, and so to keep those jobs in Montreal. And therefore, to have this virtual national securities regulator simply wouldn't work. Well, once again, if we rely on what we hear from various organizations, we believe that the industry is functioning properly. Thank you. Mr. Généreux, please, you have 7 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My questions will also be for Mr. Dorval and the CPQ. You indicated on page 3 that the CPQ recommends that corporate taxes should be decreased to 15% by 2012. Have you already assessed how many jobs would be created by that measure once it would be fully implemented? Well, I'll allow my colleague Norma Kozaya, who is an economist at the CPQ. Well, it's difficult to put a number in terms of jobs. There have been estimates with regard to payroll taxes, however. With regard to corporate taxes, we know that there is a serious productivity and investment gap in Canada compared to other countries. And so there's a very important factor with regard to these decisions, and that's taxation. We believe that more competitive tax rates will allow us to attract more foreign and domestic private investments and to increase Canada's productivity and to create high-quality jobs related to those investments. So you don't actually have a figure that you've established that would arise from that measure. For the time being, we're being very criticized for that measure, and some parties say it should not be implemented, and rather to engage in more social measures. I believe we can do both at the same time. Well, to be very clear, we have not done a very in-depth review. That's perhaps something we could do in the future. But I would point out that when you analyze the situation in Canada, clearly we have to bring private investment in. During the recession, the governments contributed greatly to ensure that the Canadian economy recovers quickly, and that was the case. However, that relative economic performance is due to public investments. We have to find all the means necessary to foster private investments. We believe that in 2011, we have to be very bold in order to stimulate private investments in Quebec. That's the only way in the long term that we can compete and make progress. With regard to the EI premiums, I would like to have your opinion on the pilot projects that were implemented as part of the Economic Action Plan of Canada, and the pilot projects that we've just announced would be extended. What do you think of those pilot projects? Are you referring to a specific pilot project? Well, the 5 additional weeks, the 14. Well, with regard to the 5 additional weeks, we believe that it was a good temporary measure, but as we don't think it should be a permanent measure. You also have to keep into account the job incentives, and we're heading towards a labor shortage. We need workers. With regard to the 14 best weeks, we see that in a favorable light because it rewards work in a better way. With regard to innovation, you've indicated that the government should sign free trade agreements. The Conservative government has done a lot in that regard. Could you perhaps elaborate at greater length? Because what are the impacts, according to you, the positive impacts for Canada? Well, more particularly, we can refer to work underway with Europe. And clearly, we are a small market compared to Europe. Europe is a huge market. We know that in Canada, our exporters in Canada and Quebec are focused on certain U.S. states as well as other Canadian provinces. However, there are niche markets. There's a greater potential in Europe in order to ensure greater diversity for our exports. But the agreements that are being discussed are also regard labor mobility. This is something that will often be repeated in Quebec with our aging population. There's a crying need for high-quality specialty jobs, and we have no choice but to open our borders to bring in a larger number of high-quality workers. You know, some countries in Europe don't want to receive the Polish plumbers, but we'd be quite open to them. I'd tell you that yesterday Canada and Ukraine signed an agreement on labor mobility. I have 1 minute left? Very well. I'd like to come back to the National Securities Commission. You've just talked about the fact that Europe is huge and Canada is small in comparison. But it isn't small in comparison to Europe. It's also small in comparison to the rest of the world. Yesterday I was listening to a TV show, and it said that 60% of humans lived in Asia. You talked about innovation, of strengthening our ties with the provinces in order to speak with a single voice in terms of national securities. You know, there's only 35 million people in Canada. Shouldn't we work in closer cooperation and speak with a single voice on the world scene? Well, first of all, I'd say that doesn't seem to be a priority need at present. Once again, I think Canada's reputation is excellent in terms of its financial industry. There were decisions that were made that allowed us to make it through the recession in better shape than others. So I don't think we have much to win with that. Things are working in Canada. And this is why we use the expression, if it's not broken, don't fix it. If you look at priorities, if we can come to an understanding in Canada and people operate smoothly, there isn't really a need to affect a financial sector in Montreal with great paying jobs. Have you heard anywhere that Montreal would be placed at a disadvantage because of this? Well, if there was a National Securities Commission, there would have to be a single decision center. So if you're saying that the decisional center would be located in Montreal, okay, I would applaud that, but I'll applaud it once I hear that.
Ensuite, Monsieur Mulcair, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Mulcair, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the representatives of the CPQ, you are showing why you have the second name you have, because you doubt of the government's intentions in that regard, and I won't blame him for that. But I'll follow up and allow him to continue his reflection on that matter, because this is something that the NDP has voted against, a centralization of securities regulations, for the simple and good reason that, first, it simply does not respect the agreement which is at the heart of our federation, the 1867 Constitution, and it will gut a very important sector in Montreal, and clearly they have no intention to locate it elsewhere than in the Greater Toronto Area. And as he's indicated, we have a system that functions, so you don't need to fix what's not broken. So thank you and congratulations. I hope the Liberals have heard that, because each time they could, they voted for a greater centralization. Of course, it's a great centralizing force in Canada, we know that. And now the Liberals are hiding behind the referral to the Supreme Court, but we registered their vote on that issue. I'd like to come back to point number 6, Mr. Dorval, on innovation. You said that the government could implement fiscal measures, tax credits, and procurement policies to encourage marketing innovation and existing clean technologies in order to accelerate their implementation in Canada and their exportation around the world. So clean technologies, you're talking about green technologies and jobs. Could you elaborate on that? And perhaps compare with the Conservatives' approach, whereby we have wall-to-wall tax decreases, and which we believe are beneficial to profitable companies, but do nothing for the manufacturing sector in Ontario, Quebec, and the forestry sector in British Columbia. Well, that's a very vast question. First of all, the CPQ, it is not a partisan organization. We don't take sides. Of course not. But we do applaud the decisions, recommendations that are made when those decisions or recommendations contribute to Quebec's prosperity, because we, first and foremost, represent Quebec employers. And so, like I said, we have no partisan intentions. That said, with regard to innovation and clean technologies or green technologies, that's very simple. We believe, and particularly in Quebec, that there's a great innovative potential with regard to clean green technologies. We have an enormous potential to develop those technologies, but we have to be able to market them. And to do so, we need showcases. We need to be able to show the world the potential, the results, and the potential, the existing potential of those technologies. We believe that Quebec, in particular, is extremely well situated to further develop those technologies. And we're very well situated, and it needs to be encouraged. So if we can build those showcases, we have to look how we can help with tax credits, but also we have to be able to demonstrate those technologies, whether it is in the transport or transit sector. There are extraordinary avenues that could be developed in Quebec, whether it is in the aerospace, in the community, the railways, etc. So there are very important elements. And in Quebec, I believe, there is a strong consensus in that regard. With regard to tax programs, you have to be careful, however. We believe that there is a sufficient pool of money out there in government. We don't want to create additional funds or additional credits. We want to reprofile certain funds or programs to ensure adequate funding, but without increasing the overall tab. But you also referred to Mr. Rochelot and his organization. Public transit is part of the solution. So I'd like to now to address my question to representatives of Imagine Canada. I had the opportunity to speak with Mr. Lausière very recently. And I'd like him to elaborate further on something we believe is very important, and we're working on it. And this is probably something that you'll be hearing from us on this issue very shortly, and which would be aligned with your proposal, something that we support. But I would like for you to take some time, which is limited, to talk about the stretched tax credit. And you give two examples. I would like you to elaborate on those examples. First, you say this would allow charities to have a stronger foundation. So you are focusing on charities, which is one objective. And then would have a sustainable impact on charities, and municipalities would benefit from those investments and would improve quality of living. am I sensing on the part of Canada that you would like to see a directive, centralizing vision, perhaps direct funding more towards charities that can alleviate the public burden and therefore direct services to the public? Well, we strongly recognize the importance that the state plays in providing services. There's no doubt about that. But in fact, in many cases, I'm not sure you properly understood my question. What I wanted to know is whether are you telling us that you would want us to be more focused in our objectives and the charities that could benefit from that stretch tax credit? No, that wasn't my objective. No. I think the objective of a stretch tax credit is to strengthen the quality and the capacity of small, medium, and large organizations, whether they're located in urban centers, in rural regions, regardless of where they're located. A lot has been done over the past few years to help philanthropists in Canada to increase their donations, and that has had a significant impact. We believe our message through the stretch tax credit would be to also create incentives for everyday people to give more. Thank you, Mr. Lauzière.
A couple of questions, then I'm going to turn it over to my friend and colleague, Mr. Pachetti. First question I have to the museums, Mr. Pachetti, this whole the idea that you mentioned of a Young Canada Works program to help encourage more young Canadian students to work in museums for summer jobs, for instance, is, I think, one that you could emphasize more. We're facing, as a country, a real challenge around youth unemployment right now. And last summer, the student unemployment was the highest it's been in a long time, and I think it's something that the committee takes very seriously. And I guess it's a comment as much as a question that I really think that that recommendation almost ought to receive greater emphasis, because I think a lot of us would find it compelling to increase and strengthen funding for young Canadians to have access to summer employment during these difficult times. I have a question to all of those representing the philanthropic sector, and that is how effective has the elimination of capital gains on gifts of publicly listed securities been for your or the elimination of the capital gains tax on gifts of publicly listed securities been to you, and whether the same approach ought to be taken to donations of land or private company holdings?
Why don't I kick off and allow my colleagues to join in. I believe the steps that have been taken, that is with respect to public securities, has been very beneficial. I cannot quantify it for my sector. However, we hear stories of it, and it's been very good. My organization over the last 3 or 4 years has actually made the recommendation in our presentations here that be extended so that property and other forms of donations would be recognized as tax deductible or tax credits as well. So we very much support that. There are, of course, some other additional issues. Imagine Canada has made some very good recommendations with respect to tax policy. There is the issue of donations that are being made via credit cards, in which case Canada is an anomaly. In other nations, credit card banks are retaining a fee for charitable donations when they are made through credit card purchases, and that is an area that does concern us. So I think there are a number of areas in charitable giving that are worthy of being looked at as a whole.
Thank you.
Yes, Heritage Canada Foundation. I think, as Mr. McAvity mentioned, any changes that can encourage Canadians to make charitable donations are certainly welcome, and securities have become an increasing area for us in our donations. I would mention, you mentioned the possibility of donation of land or property to charities. In the built heritage sector, it's not always ideal to encourage donation of historic buildings to charitable organizations because there is the ongoing requirement to invest in their maintenance. But what we would encourage is consideration of a tax credit for the donation of a protective covenant or an easement on a historic building. So that then requires owners in perpetuity to maintain those buildings and protect them, but they also do get some kind of benefit for doing that.
Thanks, Mr. Bresson. The results have been very beneficial. The policies around capital gains and Imagine Canada had supported that policy. The reason we're coming forward with this stretch now is to look at it from the other side, I guess, and look at how we can build and strengthen the base of Canadian donors for the 10 or 20 years to come. We've seen a reduction actually over the 20 years from 30% of tax filers to 24% of tax filers actually asking for a receipt for a donation, and that's not a good trend. So we need both. And I think we've done real progress on that front. I think now what we are proposing is to do something that's actually going to be very supportive of Canadians of all walks of life to become donors and support charities across the country.
Okay, you've got 5 seconds for Mr. Pichetti. Maybe I'll add that to his next round.
That's good.
Monsieur Carrier, s'il vous plaît, pour 5 minutes.
Mr. Carey, you have 5 minutes. Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Forgive me, I once again have a question for Mr. Dorval. I know he's received many questions so far, but since he's a very credible stakeholder in Quebec, and since I'm from Quebec, I do feel obliged to ask him at least one question, namely with regard to the harmonization of the sales tax, something that you raise in your brief. You say that the fact that Quebec has harmonized its tax before others should not be considered as a reason to penalize it. Now, for the benefit of my colleague, Mr. Pichetti, who recently declared that the sales tax in Quebec was not harmonized, and you claim it has been, could you perhaps elaborate on your views with regard to the sales tax? For the past year and a half, the Canadian government says that he does not negotiate in public with regard to harmonization of sales taxes. So how can you affirm that the sales tax has been harmonized and that Quebec should receive fair compensation? Thank you for your question. Well, listen. That's interesting. I worked at the time the federal government was made to implement the GST. I helped the government harmonize the sales tax in Quebec. So my perspective is a bit privileged because I contributed myself along with others, but I did work really hard at the time, and I believe that the work that was done, and there was a real will to simplify things for businesses, And today, things are simplified. And in most cases, for most businesses, things are much easier. That does not mean that everything has to be identical. There can be, of course, very legitimate concerns in a given jurisdiction as to, but here we're talking about details. We're not talking about the gist of the matter. I believe that we have an excellent harmonization, and that wasn't done overnight. It took a while, but Quebec did harmonize, and Quebec has showed its will to work as a partner with the federal government when the decision was made. And it was the first province to do so. And it was done in partnership with the federal government. Quebec receive compensation with regard to the administration of the GST, but we're not talking about compensation with regard to what was given to provinces that have come on board recently. So when you consider the overall situation, you can see that there is a certain unfairness, and I believe, I'm not there to represent the Quebec government, but clearly all this has an impact on taxation in Quebec, on all businesses in Quebec. Thank you for your clarification. 1 minute left. I have a question for Mr. Rochelot, because public transit is of a great interest to me. I see that you asking for $6 billion over the next 5 years. With regard to what the funding level is now, what does that increase represent? Is that a true improvement? Well, yes, clearly that would be an improvement. Currently, the federal government annually contributes approximately $1 billion. So if you calculate with all the programs that are in place, we're talking about doubling the federal investment from current levels. But we'd ask for the same thing from the 3 other orders of government, provinces, territories, and municipalities, in order to bridge the financial gap. I'm probably out of time. 15 seconds. Well, I wanted to ask you then, perhaps you could point out the negative impact of not investing in public transit. I believe that is something you should highlight in a future report. Thank you, Mr. Carrier.
Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses who have come today. We do appreciate your input, and as I always say, I wish there was more time to ask questions of everyone. There's a few things that I do need to clarify. Once, Mr. Dorval, I need to get you to once more repeat how important corporate tax reductions are. I'm sure I heard that in your presentation, did I not? How important it is that we actually carry through with the legislated tax cuts for the benefit of businesses. Don't look over there, look here.
Yeah, he's got to tell them that, though.
Non seulement je peux le répéter.
Not only am I ready to repeat that, but in fact, we've had the opportunity at every opportunity to show that very positive steps were taken to help private investment. And this is something we've underscored, that we were very pleased with the decisions that were made by the government. But we also mentioned that there was, in the vision, some progress that still needed to be made. And I think that the remaining progress that needs to be made is important. And since you ask, I repeat that private investment is key to future prosperity in Quebec and Canada, which does not mean that public investment isn't important. It's very important. But a country cannot only live with public investment. You need private investment as well. And if we don't want to see the type of recession, the W recession, where after having invested publicly, the private sector doesn't step up to the plate, well, then we'd lose out. So it's very important. We don't need to find new public funding programs. What's important is to keep the pool of money that's there. It's enough. We have to reduce expenditures and reduce corporate tax rates in order to foster private investment.
I do want to pick up also, Mr. Dorval, on the comments you made about review the funding model for EI. In fact, when we announced that we were going to reduce the potential increase for EI funding, at the same time we announced a consultation process. So I would certainly encourage your organization to be part of that consultation process, because it will impact your membership. Very quickly, there's a couple of things that I do need to clarify. First of all, the harmonization issue. A one-word answer. Does Quebec collect the GST, or does the federal government in Quebec?
c'est le gouvernement du Québec.
It is the Quebec government that collects.
I have to say that it has not harmonized. We're working with Mr. Bachon, encouraging him. There's discussions going on between the finance minister and the federal government, and so we're working on that. And if Quebec does finally harmonize, then we would gladly treat it the same as we do every other province. The securities regulator raises some concerns with me as well too. That I would like to just get some clarification on. Mr. Mulcair, is your microphone on or mine? Thank you.
Why don't you be polite for once and let the witness answer your question?
Oh my gosh.
Colleagues, it's Mr. Menzies' time.
Be polite.
We all know that. It's Mr. Menzies' time.
Thanks for pointing that out, Thomas, and I will get to my question that I was planning on, whether you chastise me or not. Securities regulator, we've been working on this voluntary process for some time, and there's a couple of things that we do want to clarify, that the expertise that is in the province of Quebec, if Quebec chooses to join this voluntary process, will be utilized, just like it would in any other province. So the problem that we're having right now is getting people to actually come to the table and talk about the process with the transition office that has been established. And I'll admit I'm still having problems with my province of Alberta in coming to the table to discuss this too. But we think it's for the protection of Canadians, and it's for the enhancement of the investment dollars in your membership's business. So we're just we're encouraging people to actually come to the table and talk about this process. And I sorry, I've run out of time for a question now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Réponse très brève.
A brief response, Mr. Dorval. What is of interest to us is to defend employers in Quebec who did not call for the creation of a single national regulator and who are happy with the current harmonization of the GST.
5 minutes.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci aux témoins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for appearing this afternoon. Briefly, Mr. Rochelot, one of the asks that you have is to call for exonerate taxes for services provided by employers. If the government would exonerate the tax on transit passes, people who have cars, shouldn't they be able to deduct their amount? And so it's perhaps best not to provide that tax exemption for those who want to deduct their parking expenses. Good question. Currently, 80% of employees who receive a parking space free of charge from their employers are not taxed. That's because in the legislation there's a section that provides that if the parking space isn't guaranteed, then it can't be taxable. And so there's an unfairness there between how parking and public transit is taxed. And there's no benefit for public transit. Do you have a specific statistics as to how many Canadians would benefit from that tax credit for transit passes? Well, currently, for the measure that was introduced 3 or 4 years ago, well, I don't have any accurate statistics on that, unfortunately. Yeah.
One of the aspects is the GST. You're saying that if the building does not get restored 90%, it's not eligible for a GST rebate?
No, the terms require that 90% of the fabric of the building be removed or replaced. So that level of substantial renovation almost precludes any sort of restoration project.
So are you recommending 60%? Is that what I see?
No, I think those are two different points. So we identified a number of barriers and disincentives that exist within the existing Income Tax Act. And so while we would be interested in discussing removal of those barriers, we're proposing a new tax incentive that would encourage and attract developers and owners to historic buildings.
Okay, so you wouldn't necessarily touch the GST component.
I'm sorry, I can't.
You wouldn't necessarily touch the GST component and asking that it be applicable for restoring.
No, not necessarily.
Okay. And the fund that you're asking for the heritage properties, who would manage it?
Well, it could be managed jointly between an organization like Parks Canada, the government agency, and a nonprofit organization like the Heritage Canada Foundation. Our experience shows that that sort of partnership between government and a nonprofit allows increased ability to attract donations in the private sector.
And was that ever been done before? Has it been done in the past?
No, the National Cost Sharing Program has existed in the past, but it's always been managed entirely by Parks Canada agency.
Okay. How much were they given? How much did you have in the past?
There was $20 million made available in the 2009 budget, made available over a 4-year period, but that money's now all been committed, even within the first year.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Krieber, just in terms of your members, you talked quite a bit about trying to support or make sure that the EI programs are transition into the EI transitions properly for the sellers. But I'm wondering, in terms of tax policy, does that affect your members as well when the taxes are? We talked about harmonization, but does that affect your sellers?
Well, as you know, the Direct Sellers Association and the federal government put together the GST alternate collection mechanism for the collection of the GST based on the full retail value of the sale of the products.
So for you, the more provinces that are harmonized, the easier it is that it? And trying to just reduce all regulatory burden?
I mean, it doesn't. Well, I shouldn't say it doesn't seem to bother us. I mean, we harmonized the QST under the mechanism. We harmonized the mechanism when the maritime provinces first came on board with the 15% HST, and we've done the same thing in Ontario, and British Columbia is the same way as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Pachetti. Ms. Block, you have a very brief round, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My question is going to be for the Canadian Museum Associations, and first I want to just acknowledge your comments, my appreciation for your comments around the need for us to strike a balance between disciplined strategic spending in critical areas and restraint in others in order to decrease the deficit. My question is in regards to recommendation number 1, recommendation number 2, matching donations $25 million per year, and the last statement that says the matching only applies on amounts over and above what the museum normally raises. So what I'm wondering is, how did you come up with the number of $25 million, and how does that fit with the last statement in that recommendation?
Thank you very much. Very good question. We based it on a program which already exists in the performing arts. That is for orchestras, symphonies, and dance companies, theaters, and so on. It is a $25 million program. It's been enormously successful. Museums are not eligible for that program. Furthermore, that program is restricted for long-term endowment building. And in this interest rate environment, we feel that this program would be much more beneficial to be open for matching of all sorts. So we're very confident over that figure. We think it's actually a fairly modest figure, and what it will lead to will be museums being able to stand better on their own 2 feet. I mean, these are very expensive operations, even though some of them might be volunteer-run, but they're very important institutions, I think, for the long-term horizon of a country and a nation.
1 minute.
1 minute.
Thank you. Also to Mr. McCavity, I think you mentioned that Canadian banks do or do not charge for credit card donations that are made to charities.
My understanding is that all donations which are made by credit cards are subject to fees by banks and or other processing agencies.
Is that the case in other countries?
I'm sorry?
Is that the case in other countries?
To my knowledge, in most other countries, they are exempted from that. In Australia, that is the case. New Zealand, and a number of other cases. I think from a consumer's point of view, when you're going to give $100 to a charity of your choice, you think all $100 is going to the charity, whereas in effect a percentage, 2, 3, 4, 5%, is actually going for the management of the transaction.
To the bank or to the credit card company, like the Visa?
That's right.
I see. For Mr. Krieber, I think sorry, this is through the 20 seconds. Okay, my question is tax credits. Mr. Luzier, you talk about tax credits. How do our tax credits compare to other countries in terms of the generosity with which we reward them?
The tax credit system we have now is a generous one, a very generous one. One of the issues is the awareness of it is not huge, and that's an issue. The reason we are proposing the stretch tax credit is that idea of getting people incentive to give always a bit more. That's why we're not recommending that the tax credit be raised holus bolus from 29% to 39 or 40%, because it is at a generous level. What we're looking at, I think that's where the innovation is here, is to try to get people to constantly give a bit more so that we can, over the next 10 or 20 years, rebuild that base of donors that is slowly starting to erode in Canada.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to thank all the presenters for being here, your presentations, responding to our questions. Colleagues, we will suspend for a couple minutes and bring the next panel forward. Okay. I'll ask colleagues and witnesses to take their seats, please, for our second panel. And the organizations we have here are, first of all, the Canadian Bankers Association, Polytechnics Canada, the Forest Products Association of Canada, the Western Canadian Wheat Growers Association, the Grain Growers of Canada, the Canada Foundation for Innovation, and the Cooperative Housing Federation of Canada. Each of you will have 5 minutes for an opening statement, and we'll start with the Canadian Bankers Association.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the committee for allowing us to appear today. I'm with my colleague, Darren Hanna. Nous sommes heureux de constater que
we are pleased to note that despite the unstable economic environment in the past few years, our banks have remained solid and contributing greatly to Canada's economy. Canada was one of the rare countries whose banking system saw no bank failures and needed no taxpayer bailouts. In fact, just last month, the World Economic Forum ranked Canada's banks as the world's soundest for the third year in a row.
I will not go through some of the great benefits of our banking system because I'm sure that this committee is well aware of the impact on the economy. I would say, though, that our submission today focuses on three things: enhancing the climate for business investment and job creation, improving the international competitiveness of business in Canada, and reviewing and updating measures in our retirement system. First, a short note on regulation, Mr. Chair. The strength of our banking system makes it very clear that our regulatory system here in Canada is sound. Nonetheless, our banks will be subject to new international rules being decided by the G20 and the Basel Committee, rules that will certainly impose higher capital and liquidity levels on all banks. Now, while these rules are very important to the stability of the global banking system, there will be an impact on banks in Canada. Our banks have already been at a higher standard than most banks around the world, and yet they will certainly have to adjust to these new requirements. So, Mr. Chair, we also believe that the benefits of our sound national regulatory system should be applied to our securities sector as well. And for many years, I think you know, the CBA has advocated for efficient securities regulation that would offer improved investor protection and reduce the cost of raising capital for businesses across the country. So we are encouraged by the work of the Canadian Securities Transition Office, and we will continue to support the need for Parliament to pass the necessary legislation. Moving to tax, when it comes to creating a more competitive tax system, we believe the government is on the right track. You clearly know about the federal government's announced commitment to reduce the corporate income tax rate to 15% by 2012. We certainly feel that making Canada's tax system more competitive will contribute to our economy in the form of new jobs, increased investment. It has, in fact, been estimated that the 3% decline in the federal corporate income tax rate for businesses of all sizes would generate $47 billion in additional capital investment and some 223,000 jobs over time. So these are substantial benefits, and we very much support these reductions for the benefit of all Canadians. We were also pleased, Mr. Chair, to note that among this committee's 2009 pre-budget recommendations was one to explore the feasibility of implementing a consolidated tax reporting framework for all businesses in Canada, and that was referenced as well in the last federal budget. This initiative is absolutely required to stop wasteful administrative and transaction costs and also put Canada's businesses on an equal footing with the other G7 countries, since we are the only G7 country without a consolidated reporting framework. Mr. Chair, I just want to mention the importance of personal saving and investment. There is a section in our brief with respect to that issue. Saving for retirement is certainly on the minds of all Canadians, but many do not have access to employer pension plans, and particularly small business owners. So we feel it's important to delink pension plans from the employment relationship and allow third parties like financial institutions to offer such plans so all Canadians will be provided with the same tools to save for their retirement. And finally, Mr. Chair, there is, as you know, le groupe de travail sur la littératie financière qui a été établi par le gouvernement.
The Canadian Financial Literacy Working Group, and we can continue our discussion with the federal government and all parliamentarians with regard to financial literacy, which we believe is a priority.
And be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you for your presentation. We'll now hear from Polytechnics Canada.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for inviting us again to address your committee. My name is Nobina Robinson, and I'm joined by my colleague Ken Doyle of Polytechnics Canada. Contributing to Canada's economic success is what polytechnic institutions do. It is an integral part of our mission. We foster economic growth through applied research that addresses commercial needs. I can't emphasize this enough. Our research is driven by industry requirements, not by academic curiosity. And being close to our clients, we deliver results quickly and efficiently. Just ask the thousands of firms that come to us for help. We help small and medium-sized businesses solve a variety of challenges, from the design and prototype stages of new products right through to their commercialization, and finally to adoption by Canadian consumers. In the past year, the federal budget and its research funding agencies of government have recognized our positive economic contribution by boosting available applied research support to the college sector, and for that we are thankful. We appreciate the measured, positive, and forward changes within programs at NSERC, at the Federal Economic Development Agency for Southern Ontario, SHERC. I note particularly the presence today of the Canada Foundation for Innovation, CFI, which has recently announced a new fund for vitally needed college research infrastructure, and I wish to thank the CFI for this recognition. The 9 members of Polytechnics Canada are located in key economic regions across the country in BC, Alberta, and Ontario. All 9 have broken out of the mold of the traditional community college. While we still offer proudly diplomas, essential trades, and apprenticeship training, together the 9 of us offer 76 bachelor degrees. And we work together with our university partners to offer another 21 joint bachelor degrees. We are seeing more and more examples of collaborative research projects between university and college faculty on a project-by-project informal basis. This is an important new trend which should be encouraged. Last year, we provided you with concrete examples of how our members are helping companies in Canada. Today, I want to share 3 more success stories. In Vancouver, the British Columbia Institute of Technology is helping to develop a smart grid electricity system for Schneider Electric, the world's largest producer of energy management software. The idea is to let customers manage their electricity use to take advantage of different prices during peak demand periods to reduce their costs. In Toronto, Mill Pond Cannery and Preserves Company sought George Brown College's assistance in developing their business. The partnership resulted in the commercialization of Mill Pond's maiden line of fruit butters, and in an interdisciplinary effort saw the product right from R&D to assembly line to store shelves. And in Calgary, Bobsleigh Canada Skelton is making use of SAIT Polytechnic's expertise in sports engineering to design a sled that can be produced at a lower cost to encourage more participants in a sport where Canada is a world leader. These are just 3 examples of dozens of examples of win-win cooperation between SMEs and polytechnic institutions, often propelled by the one and only modest Federal Granting Council program for college research. In 09-10, our 9 members consulted with 750 local companies, conducted 351 applied research, and resulted in 124 prototypes being developed. We believe in measuring the outputs of your dollars, so we are very important for us. Due to the size and nature of these companies, the current economic situation, we are confident that without the applied research services of our students and faculty, the majority of these companies would not have undertaken these projects, and these ideas would have remained on blueprint paper instead of being turned into tangible prototypes. We recognize that the country is now facing severe constraints on new spending. That is why we have offered practical ideas for small-scale, targeted, incremental and pilot projects that continue to modestly build the capacity of research-intensive colleges in Canada. Opportunities exist to encourage and incentivize the smaller and newer entrants in the innovation system, such as colleges and small companies. We've mentioned two such opportunities in our paper, a commercialization chair program and a program designed to harness the latent talent of newcomers with industrial experience to mentor our students. With additional research training support for the Canadian college sector, Canada could make better use not only of the 130,000 full-time students at our polytechnics, but the creativity and innovation that lies untapped in all Canadian college graduates coast to coast to coast. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll hear next from Mr. Lazar, please, Forest Products Association of Canada.
Thank you. As I'm certain all the parliamentarians sitting around these tables know, the last few years have been very painful for the forest industry. Many towns have suffered the heartbreak of mills closing. 55,000 Canadians lost their jobs. And change is very painful, but there are still 600,000 Canadians that depend upon the forest industry. And we have been at this committee many times, and we've always delivered the same message. We implore parliamentarians not to try and freeze the status quo, not to try and help us by preventing change, but the role of government is to help accelerate the transformation of Canada's forest industry so that we can secure those 600,000 jobs tomorrow and in the future. We know the markets are there and we know we can do it. We haven't been waiting for governments to do this for us. We've improved our productivity. We have increased our exports to China and India. In fact, we are the biggest exporter to China now from Canada. We have secured our environmental reputation with the Boreal Agreement. We have gone to a model of extracting maximum value from every tree so that now we are working from a biorefinery concept in which we get not just 2x4s and pulp and paper, but also bioenergy, biofuels, and bioplastics from every tree. In other words, we have been doing the hard work of transforming the industry, sometimes painful, sometimes quite joyous, but all necessary if we're going to keep these jobs. In the past, parliamentarians have responded in the right way by supporting us with research and development funds, by supporting us with export development funds, by supporting us with green transformation funds. And what we are asking today in the next budget is to see a continuation of that support. And we have 3 R's for you. The first is to renew the existing programs that support R&D, market development, and environmental reputation. So renew those programs. We're not looking for more funding. We're not looking for big increases. We need those programs renewed, and we hope that you take a close look at them and make certain that they're well focused and revitalized. Second, we want to see a recapitalization of the IFIT program. That's the Forest Industry Transformation Program. It's tremendously successful. We've seen some near miraculous transformations in many companies that are now applying to use that money, which will change the business model. It's a program that creates industry independence and competitiveness instead of dependence. So we'd like to see it recapitalized. And third, we'd like to see the money that is now in the Next Generation Biofuels Fund at SDTC reprofiled to be open to all bioenergy projects. That is stranded money, $500 million that's not being used anywhere near where it could be. We can take that money and use it to secure jobs across the country. We can use that money to switch from fossil fuels to bioenergy, reduce costs. It will have an immediate impact on employment in Canada's forest regions, as well as long-term competitiveness, as well as Canada's clean and green energy profile. So this is not a time for big new spending. It's a time for spending smarter, renewing the existing programs with a clear eye to how they can be fine-tuned, recapitalizing the transformative industry transformation program, and reprofiling the money that is now there for next generation biofuels so we can use them this generation to secure jobs in Canada's rural regions. We have always said that the role of Parliament, the role of the government, is to support our transformation. The role of industry, of unions, of workers, of managers, is to do the heavy lifting of transforming. We have tightened our belts. We have suffered the pain of consolidating factories. Unions have taken rollbacks in wages, as have owners and managers. We see huge potential in the future with markets growing, and we hope that parliamentarians and the government will continue to support these necessary and profoundly useful programs. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll now hear from the Western Canadian Wheat Growers Association.
Thank you for the opportunity to provide our association's views to the Finance Committee on the changes we believe that the Minister of Finance should include in the 2011 budget. My name is Jared Gust, and I'm a full-time farmer and volunteer chair of the Western Canadian Wheat Growers. For the past 40 years, the Wheat Growers have been a voluntary organization of business-minded prairie farmers who recognize the importance of competitive markets, innovation, and free trade. Our mandate is to advance the development of a profitable and sustainable agriculture industry. Competitiveness of Canadian farmers has been undermined by an excessive tax burden and onerous regulatory impediments. The Wheat Growers provide the following 5 recommendations with the sure knowledge that these changes will lead to greater economic prosperity and an investment in the agricultural sector. First, we recommend that block averaging of farm income over 5 years be restored. As I'm sure you know, due to environmental factors, grain farming is subject to tremendous swings in farm income. These are not factories, mines, or mills that a set production is almost guaranteed. As long as the equipment is operating, the inability to average income causes farmers to pre-purchase inputs or buy equipment to reduce their tax liability in those years when the tax income is projected to be relatively high. While this makes perfect sense from a tax planning point of view, it may not be in keeping with the best farm practices. In our view, the tax system should be structured in a way that encourages farmers to engage in sound business practices. The restoration of 5-year block averaging would help achieve this. Secondly, we recommend the introduction of an investment tax credit on the purchase of certified seed. Currently, the use of certified seed in Western Canada is at 18%, which is among the lowest of all industrialized nations. The use of certified seed tends to increase and improve uniformity of product, which allows us to better meet quality needs of end users in markets here and around the world. Such a tax credit would promote innovation and allow Canadian farmers to retain our reputation as a leading producer of quality wheat. It would also encourage the development of new varieties that have the potential to enhance human health. And our third recommendation is to increase public expenditures on seed research and development. For various reasons, there's very little private investment in cereal grain research in Canada. To compensate this, we recommend that A-base agricultural research funding be returned to the 1994 levels, adjusted for inflation. This should be done in increments over the next 10 years. I'd like to pass the rest of my time over to our Saskatchewan VP, Jeff Hewson, and thank you very much for your time.
You have 2 minutes, Mr. Hewson.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Jared. Our fourth recommendation is to increase the lifetime capital gains exemption on the sale of farm assets. Currently, the exemption of the sale of qualified farm property is $750,000. According to the 2006 Census of Agriculture, the average age of Canadian farmers is 52. This means that a large number of farmers will be retiring from farming over the next several years. To facilitate the transfer of farm assets to the next generation and to encourage young farmers' entry into the business, the Wheat Growers recommend the capital gains exemption be increased to $1 million. Our fifth and final recommendation is for the government to move forward in implementing a voluntary Canadian Wheat Board. The continuation of the CWB marketing monopoly in Western Canada represents the single greatest impediment to farm profitability and economic prosperity in Western agriculture today. The monopoly stifles investment in research and grain processing in Western wheat and barley. The CWB monopoly provides lower returns to prairie farmers than would exist in open market conditions. One example is a 2008 study by Informa Economics, which found that the Canadian Wheat Board provided Western Canadian farmers with lower returns than an open market in 5 of the 6 years it examined for both spring wheat and durum wheat. The Informa study had pegged farmer losses due to the monopoly at $450 to $628 million annually. Needless to say, the increase in farm revenue resulting from a voluntary CWB would greatly improve farm income and generate considerably more tax revenue. I would add as well that implementing a voluntary CWB does not require any increased spending on the part of the government. This policy change represents a cost-free means to stimulate the economy and to help slay the deficit. I'd like to thank the committee members and the chair for inviting us, and we look forward to your questions after the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. We'll now hear from the Grain Growers of Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Gary Stanford, and I am a farmer from southern Alberta. The Grain Growers of Canada represent 80,000 grain and pulse and oilseed farmers. We believe that the government does not owe farmers a living, but should create a policy environment that will allow us to make a living. Our aim is to ensure an advantage for our farmers through innovation, and we have a couple of budget requests. Public research. Federal contributions to agriculture and Agricultural Canada's research branch are only 60% of the 1994 inflationary adjusted numbers, and we have far fewer plant scientists and breeders today. There is a big need for increased investment in research branch expenditures and a plan to replacing aging scientists. A good example of public research on my farm is the Ag Canada breeders developed a winter wheat resistant to the leaf curl mite. This insect used to wipe out acres on my crop, and there was no way to control it. This has put thousands of dollars a year in my pocket just on my farm alone. Certified seed tax incentive. One of the barriers to private and public investment into cereal and pulse research is the low use of certified seed. Except in Quebec, where farmers plant certified seed to qualify for crop insurance. When I go to talk to public plant breeders in Lethbridge Research Station in Alberta, they tell me that the more certified seed sold, the more money that would flow back into their work. A tax credit of 155% for farmers to buy new certified seed annually would encourage more investment in cereals and pulses. The George Morris Centre estimates that if we reach full seed use potential, the tax credit would be increased farm incomes over $170 million just from the 8 most recent varieties alone, generate over $60 million in tax revenues from just these 8 varieties. Return to the economy would be $600 million. Capital cost allowance adjustments. There are places on our farms where adjustment to depreciation rates would provide a direct stimulus to jobs and improve our sustainability. First, we would encourage safe on-farm fertilizer storage to allow us to buy when prices are low and ensure supplies. Secondly, just as UMPs use GPSs in your cars, we should encourage all farmers to use GPS in our machinery because it will keep our tractors driving in straight lines. This reduces pesticide use, fertilizer use, and fuel consumptions on our farms. Lastly, we must improve the quality of our on-farm grain storage. In the last couple of years, we have seen greatly increased testing in cereals, pulses, and oilseeds for trace amounts of mytoxins. We need better storage and monitoring systems on our farm. For example, aeration, which blows large volumes of air, both dries our grain and cools it down to prevent growth of harmful bacteria. Looking forward, we are going to have to install more temperature monitoring control cables to catch any early problems. This would help ensure our harvested grain remains in top condition as healthy for Canadian consumers. In conclusion, the Grain Growers believes that increased agriculture research in Canada is critical to secure the prosperity of Canadian farmers. $26 million a year in increased core Ag Canada research funding over 10 years would restore us to 1994 levels. A certified seed and incentive tax credit would promote greater public and private sector involvement in cereals, pulses, and forage research. Investments in more environmentally and sustainable ways of farming, safer grain storage would help increase consumer confidence in our own domestic food systems. These initiatives would create jobs and economic activity, as well as strengthen the competitiveness of the Canadian farmers, and will also help reduce the need for farm support programs. We urge you to give careful consideration to our thoughts and ideas. We look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Ensuite, la Fondation Canadienne pour...
Now, the Canadian Foundation for Innovation. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Allow me first to thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak before the Standing Committee on Finance. In preparing the budget, the government has to make difficult choices. Everyone agrees with that. They are about setting some clear national priorities and making sure that the impact of the investments being made will benefit all Canadians.
My vision of the CFI's role in meeting both the current and future challenges facing Canada, particularly when it comes to strengthening our capacity to conduct world-class research, attracting the best researchers from around the world, and translating their research findings into tangible solutions. As you know, the mission of the CFI is to invest in cutting-edge research infrastructure that strengthens the capacity of Canadian universities, colleges, and research hospitals to carry out world-class research and technology development that benefits Canadians. The CFI funds 40% of the infrastructure costs, and institutions then use this funding to attract the remainder from partners in the public, private, and not-for-profit sectors. La recherche rendue possible par les investissements de...
The research enabled by these CFI investments supports the conditions necessary for sustainable long-term economic growth and helps inform the policy-making process, leading to the creation and development of improved public policies and programs in areas such as natural resources.
Committed $5.3 billion in support of 6,800 projects at 130 research institutions in 65 municipalities across the country. These investments by the Government of Canada through the CFI have leveraged an additional $7 billion in partnerships for a total of $12 billion in just over a decade. The overall economic impact of these infrastructure investments and their ongoing operation is an important part of the Canadian economy, given that it can be measured in tens of billions of dollars. The CFI exists thanks to the belief of successive governments that research and innovation underpins the competitiveness of our industries and can transform our economy. As one of my predecessors once said, the challenge of building a more innovative economy is about more than a slab of concrete or a piece of equipment. It's about people. It's about supporting the best and the brightest by providing them with the environment they need to conduct world-class research. This, in turn, will create prosperity for Canadians. Imagine for a moment your reaction if I had stood before you 10 years ago and boldly declared that a decade from now, Saskatoon would be home to the state-of-the-art synchrotron, Canada's biggest science project in a generation, that Chicoutimi would be a world leader in developing de-icing technology for commercial airplanes and hydroelectric wires around the world, that British Columbia would be on the cutting edge of helping improve the quality of life of people with spinal cord injury, or that Nova Scotia would be leading an 82-nation project to gauge and record the diversity, distribution, and abundance of life in the world's ocean. You likely would have reacted with disbelief, yet today, as I stand here, all of these advances are a reality for Canada, in large part due to the investments made by the Canada Foundation for Innovation. De tels investissements permettent d'une part de créer des...
Investments like these are creating jobs and are leading to innovative breakthroughs in some of today's most important, exciting areas of investigation, from advanced materials to pharmaceuticals, renewable energy, high-performance computing, and early childhood education.
Contracting. It found that in 2008, companies, governments, and not-for-profit organizations contracted almost $2 billion worth of research from Canadian universities and affiliated teaching hospitals, up from $1.1 billion in 2006. This is an increase of 80% over a 2-year period. Why? Because Canada's best is now becoming the world's best. To ensure that the CFI continues to carry out its mandate of promoting research excellence while continuing to improve Canada's long-term competitiveness and the quality of life of Canadians, we require continued support from the Government of Canada in 4 areas. First, to address the needs of our core Leading Edge and New Initiatives Funds program. Second, to develop collaborative initiatives with other federal research granting agencies to focus Canada's research strengths on issues of national importance. Thirdly, to ensure that Canada continues to play an active role in strategic international research activities. And finally, to support national research platforms in areas such as high-performance computing and other new initiatives. It is critically important that Budget 2011 send a clear signal to Canada's research community that when it comes to science and technology, Canada will continue to invest in cutting-edge research, world-class research infrastructure.
Closing, I want to thank you for providing me with this, my first opportunity to testify before Parliament at the helm of the CFI. And Mr. Chair, I look forward to your questions. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. And now?
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you. I want to just go very briefly over the proposals that we put into our brief and then talk about something a little bit different. Firstly, like many others here, we recognize the economic situation that Canada is facing and the impact that will have on next year's budget. So we are not proposing new housing spending for 2011. There is money, however, on the table. The federal government has put money on the table for the Affordable Housing Initiative, and that runs to 2014. Our recommendation is that in the redesign of that program, which is supposed to come next year, that there be a much closer relationship between the amount of money that's provided to the provinces and territories and the outcomes that Canada needs, which is a reduction in housing need among Canadians. Right now, there is a lack of an accountability framework, and in my view, far too much discretion on how the housing spending is targeted to, if you like, sort of pet markets by the provinces. I won't go any further into that, but I think it's the same message that I came here with last year. We need an accountability framework if you're going to hand money over to the provinces to spend on housing. Secondly, I'd like to alert parliamentarians to what I would describe as an impending crisis in existing social housing. We have some 600,000 units of social housing in Canada that in some way or other has been federally sponsored. Over the next decade, we're going to see the present funding agreements for those projects come to an end. And a lot of that funding it comes by way of assistance to help lower-income Canadians, particularly those with fixed incomes, pay their rents. Absent those funding agreements, absent that money, I think we're facing an affordability crisis of monumental proportions. Just to give you one example, there are some 60,000 units of federally sponsored cooperative housing. By 2020, fully 50,000 of those units will no longer have any federal assistance to help house low-income people. The situation is much worse still for municipal housing providers and for non-profit housing providers. And what we're saying is that this would be a very good time for the Government of Canada to study this problem, to decide what, if anything, we're going to do about it. I think we have to do a lot about it, personally, and to involve stakeholders in that study. Right now, all we're hearing from government is a deafening silence on this issue, and it's going to creep up on us, and we are going to have a very hot potato to handle unless we've considered how we're going to handle this in advance. Our brief also talks about the economic case for housing, and I'd like to refer to the report from the Conference Board of Canada, Building from the Ground Up, which came out earlier this year. Quite simply, what they said, and we agree with it, is a better housed population is healthier, it's better educated, more productive, and less likely to produce clients of the justice system. These are precisely the attributes of the workforce needed in an emerging knowledge-based economy. The cost of inaction, when taken as a whole, including the relationship between poverty and a whole range of negative social outcomes, is likely greater than the cost of doing something about it. We can do something about it in 2 ways: better access to affordable housing, hence my accountability framework proposal, and better opportunities for personal income growth. We can go a long way towards achieving the latter by just making it easier for Canadians to escape the welfare trap and enter the workforce through a combination of tax and benefits policies that act as an incentive to escape income assistance dependency. And I'd like to conclude with a more general observation. There was once a report that was created, and it described the conditions under which the working poor lived. The study concluded that after paying for their shelter costs, many families were barely able to afford the necessities of life. If the family breadwinner were to become incapacitated in some way, taken ill or injured, the family would go hungry. Children and the elderly were found to be particularly at risk of malnourishment. That study was called Poverty, a Study of Town Life, and it was released in 1900 in the UK. It was written by a guy called Seabohm Rowntree, of the Rowntree Foundation fame. What I find amazing is you can still find echoes of Rowntree's report right here in Canada 110 years later. In Canada today, there are an estimated 500,000 households that must spend more than 50% of their income just to put a roof over their heads. That doesn't leave very much for them to feed and clothe the rest of the family. The result, and I think most Canadians are not aware of this, is that there are numbers of children, women and men in this country who often go to bed hungry. And just as in Rowntree's day, the working poor are still vulnerable. 14% of food bank clients in this country are the working poor.
1 minute.
And seniors and children remain disproportionately at risk. Now, regardless of which side of the political spectrum the people in this room may sit, I can't imagine there's a single one of us that considers the situation acceptable, that we would still have conditions in 21st century Canada that Seabohm Rowntree would recognize from his own report of 110 years ago. The problem of hunger in Canada is very closely related to a shortage of decent housing that is affordable to Canadians with low incomes. So what can we do? I already noted that we can improve the accountability framework of the money that's already on the table. It's probably less than what we need, so let's make sure we spend it wisely. Let's also set the housing agenda in the broader context of jobs and incomes and in terms of the economic benefits housing development brings. But beyond that, let's not forget for one moment that this country continues to suffer under the blight of poverty, real poverty, poverty that leaves children without enough to eat. It is something we should not be prepared to live with. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. We'll start members' questions with Mr. Bryson for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to each of you for your interventions. First question is to Mr. Lazar, and I'm impressed with the degree to which the Canadian forestry industry has transformed, continues to transform itself into a green industry, and to be competitive in a global carbon-constrained economy is going to be very important for the entire Canadian economy. But how does the environment in Canada and the incentives provided by the Canadian government for your industry to embrace the bioeconomy and the green economy, how do those incentives compare with those of other countries, for instance, the U.S. and European countries?
Well, there's no doubt that Europe is far more ambitious in creating incentives and infrastructure for green energy, as is, for that matter, China and certainly the U.S. So if you have a forest mill, a lumber mill or a pulp and paper mill in the U.S., in Europe, or in many other places in the world, the incentive structure for transformation to green energy is considerably more generous than in Canada. I have to acknowledge that the government did come up with the $1 billion Green Transformation Program, and though it was less than what we could have gotten in the U.S., it was more intelligently designed, so we actually got more bang for the buck. But overall, if there's one thing that would benefit Canada's forest industry, it's on the incentives for transformation to green energy. Take, for example, Quebec, where there huge dependence on fossil fuels. That's a tremendous cost factor. If we go to biofuels, it reduces the cost, increases the jobs, and increases the green performance. Similar out west. So, and that's why the reprofiling of that $500 million that's now limited to next generation biofuels into more general bioenergy could, at no cost to the government, just smarter use of existing money, make a very large difference.
Right. Thank you. I have a question for Mr. Patry, and with regards to the importance of innovation and science research. When comparing the Canadian government stimulus package with other countries' stimulus packages around the world in terms of investment in science, Canada is at the bottom in terms of investment in science-based stimulus compared to any other industrialized country, and in fact compared to emerging economies like China, we simply have not invested in science. What does that lack of investment represent in terms of the potential loss of the jobs of tomorrow? You've demonstrated that scientific investment through CFI have created significant opportunities and jobs. Are you concerned with the comparative lack of investment in science in the Canadian stimulus package and what that will mean in terms of our lack of competitiveness in key sectors tomorrow?
Well, thank you very much for the question. We've been fortunate in recent years. As you know, the Canada Foundation for Innovation has been in place for only a little over 10 years. So Canada is very new at the business of funding the types of science and technology investments that we're talking about. However, I must say that the $5.3 billion that has been received over the last 10 years has gone a long way. You're making reference to, obviously, the stimulus part of the science and technology investments. Universities and colleges have benefited from the Knowledge Infrastructure Fund, the KIP projects. And we have benefited in recent years. Now, all of this is before the 2008 crisis, but we've benefited from a number of additional projects and investments, such as the Canada Excellence Commercialization and Research Fund, the Centres of Excellence on Commercialization and Research, and the business-led NCEs. It's obvious that we need, and I've tried to make this case in my presentation, we need a continued investment in research funding, both at the institutional level. Operating grants for granting councils are terribly important, and also on the infrastructure side. It's critical. And, you know, the Canada Foundation for Innovation, if you look at our 12-year existence with $5.3 billion, you estimate about $400 or $500 million a year of investments that have been made. But you have to also understand that this has been leveraged significantly, and that's an important aspect.
Ms. Hughes-Anthony, it's great to see you again, and I've enjoyed working with you over the years, both with your chamber work and with the Banking Association, and it's nice to see you here today. You say that in your presentation that the federal government set out a plan to eliminate the deficit by 2015. The Parliamentary Budget Officer has called that plan weak.
Excuse me, I didn't say that, Mr. Bryson.
Encouraging.
I only spoke about the tax reduction plan.
The federal government said that. Oh, I'm sorry. It's part of your. It's on page 2 of your report, the top paragraph for your presentation. Mm-hmm. I bring that to your attention for a couple of reasons. One is that this government has missed every deficit target it has set. So when you present that in its own budget, 2010 budget, that the government has set out a plan to eliminate its deficit, I would urge you to not only look at the government's numbers, but also the Parliamentary Budget Officer's projections. It's page 2, top paragraph.
I see that. I'm sorry, Mr. Bryson. I thought you were referring to my spoken remarks.
No, sorry.
Okay.
Just a brief question.
And the reason I raised that point is that I believe that deficit levels in Canada are critically, it's critically important that we get out of deficit.
Okay.
And
thank you.
That we're just, if I may.
You've got 0 seconds left.
I'd appreciate,
Ms. Hughes-Anthony, if we can just have a brief response.
I'd appreciate your feedback on.
Mr. Bryson, I'm sorry, your time is up.
Is it more important to actually get Canada out of deficit?
I'm sorry, your time is up, Mr. Bryson. We're over time here. Ms. Hughes-Anthony, if we can get a brief response on that topic.
Certainly. I'd like to mention, Mr. Bryson, this submission was done in August 2010, and a lot of things have changed since that particular time. I mean, the point about Canadian banks and their involvement in any kind of stimulus is really to keep banks open, to keep banks lending. Okay. I mean, that has been the point, and that continues to be the point as far as the financial system is concerned.
Thank you very much. Monsieur Paet, s'il vous plaît, pour 7 minutes.
Oui, Mr. Paet for 7 minutes. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I would have liked to have the time, and perhaps I will when I ask questions on the housing cooperatives. Nevertheless, I have questions as well for the President of the Canadian Bankers Association. You must know that last Thursday, the president of the Canadian Association of Securities Regulators, Ian Russell, was here, and I asked him whether he represented securities regulators in all provinces and territories, including the AMF, and he said yes. At the same time, I asked him whether his group used a single system, that is the passport system, and if that was a system whereby the securities system in Canada operated, and whether the system in Canada had harmonized all the systems and tariffs. And basically, I was asking him whether he represented Canada's industry, which functioned very well. And he said, yes, that's true. Our industry, I think, functions well. Earlier, we heard from the president of the Quebec Employers Council, who told us that he believed that a single securities regulator in Canada, as envisioned by the government, that the value added of such a single securities regulator has to be demonstrated, that according to most domestic and international observers, the system was functioning properly. We're concerned by the negative impact that the federal project could have on the Quebec financial industry, according to Mr. Dorval. I myself, who issued securities, and you must know this, whether you are an issuer, whether you are in Rivière-du-Loup, or in Calgary, in Burlington, in Edmonton, or Vancouver, Saskatchewan, you have to deal with a single, henceforth, regulator in Canada. And you're saying that a fragmented system, with all due respect, perhaps 20 years ago that was the case. It was a fragmented system. But today it is no longer fragmented. So how can you come out and say today that the financial system is fragmented and does not work when everyone agrees that it functions very well? Yes, Mr. Payet, not everyone agrees with that.
From the recent international financial crisis that underline even more the importance of us having a single unified approach to securities regulation in this country. Certainly there are efficiencies to be gained, and in my view, the passport model, which some might say is okay, does not go far enough. The passport model entrenches infrastructure, costs, and time factors, which in today's environment, investors don't really want to afford. And, you know, you have not only Canadian investors, but you have investors from overseas that come and look at the Canadian system and say, I can't believe this. It's like driving my car across the country and having to get a license in every different province. It's crazy. So I feel that for a variety of reasons, including in particular, Mr. Payet, increased enforcement.
Apologize for interrupting because it's on my time, but you know very well that what you've just said is false. When you're a Canadian issuer, you can issue within your province and you have a passport. And moreover, there was an international convention in Montreal. The securities players from across the world attended that convention held in Montreal. The only player that wasn't there is the Canadian Minister of Finance. And in that regard, I think there is exaggeration on behalf of the Canadian bankers, on the part of Canadian bankers, who want to acquire that industry and centralize it in Toronto. And moreover, you add that within your brief that we would be better protected. You say that a single regulator would provide enhanced protection to investors. But you know full well that with regard to the policing, with regard to catching white-collar thieves, that is an issue for the criminal code. And if there are Earl Jones out there, and if there are other malfeasance, whether there's a single regulator in Canada, those are criminals, and it is the criminal code that applies, not the issuers of the securities themselves. And so you know full well that the current system functions very well. So then why endanger a system that works so well? I know I have a minute left, Mr. Chair. If you would imperil it by creating an organization that would go against all those positives.
Disagree on this point, because I do think enforcement can be much improved across the country. I do believe that some of the provisions that are put into the proposed Act, which is now under consideration, will allow enforcement agencies and police officers much greater collaboration and therefore improve enforcement across the country. I guess I would also take exception to your vous avez dit qu'ils allaient centraliser.
You said that they would centralize operations in Toronto. That hasn't been decided.
And certainly the current model that seems to be being discussed by the Transition Office talks about the need to utilize the important expertise that exists in Quebec, in BC, in Alberta, in terms of the proposed Canadian securities regulator.
Okay, thank you. Merci. We'll go to Mr. Wallace, please.
Given my time to Mr. Menzies.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Wallace. I have to run here in a few minutes. Thank you, Ms. Anthony, for clarifying that, and accept our apologies for someone on this committee suggesting that you were not telling the truth, because you, in fact, were. We do appreciate that, and thank you for clarifying some of the misinformation out there. I have some very serious questions for the Western Canadian wheat growers and for the grain growers of Canada. Please tell me you finished your harvest before you took time to come down here. Yes. All done. Thank you. Thank you. I know that the timing is bad, but thank you for coming. So a few concerns. The 5-year block averaging. I understand where you're going with this. We used to have it. My good friend Mr. Wallace raises a good question. If we do it for farmers, do we not have to do it for all industries? What would your comment be?
Actors, retailers.
Would you like to speak to that? I'll speak to that. Thank you for the question, Ted. And I understand what you're saying. The way our association looks at it is there's a budget for agriculture. There's obviously lots of federal dollars go into the agricultural industry. In terms of the effectiveness of dollars, like the gentleman from the Research Council said, I think overall research dollars are probably far and away the best way to invest money into agriculture. The return on investment is greatest. I'm looking at our farm, canola, different varieties in wheat, you know, just staggering returns. Having said that, there are other areas, and maybe an efficient way of providing help to farmers while not spending excessive amounts of money would be the block averaging, kind of a high return on investment, if you will.
All right. I most liked your presentation, the part of your presentation where you said it wouldn't cost the Government of Canada a penny if we got rid of the monopoly powers of the Canadian Wheat Board. I can't help but go back to my own experiences when I sat exactly where you are and explained that to the Finance Committee, the Agricultural Committee, the Trade Committee of this House of Commons when I was a farmer before I was ever a member of Parliament, and explained the fact that throughout my career in farming, the Canadian Wheat Board on my wheat alone had probably cost me $1.5 million, not to mention barley and the lost potential in other crops. Share with us why we need to get rid of this monopoly that is only in place for farmers west of the Manitoba border. Whoever wants to take a shot at that.
I guess going back to my farm again, it's just inconceivable on as far as cash flow planning. Our farm is a 16,000 acre farm. we grow approximately 5,000 acres of wheat and 2,000 acres of barley last year. It fluctuates every year, but that was last year. The cash flow for that, if I happen to use the pooling option of the Canadian Wheat Board, is just inconceivable that I would have to wait 2 Christmases to get my final payment on the money. The initial payments are so low as to be a joke. I don't know if that's a government problem or a Canadian Wheat Board problem, but I know it's only a problem when dealing with the Canadian Wheat Board. It's just inconceivable that I have to wait so long to get money to operate. You ask about block averaging. It's because I don't get money to pay my bills that I need to weigh things in and out and try to shuffle around. I think it's just an obvious presentation, an obvious solution that would not cost the government a single dollar.
Do you know any other industry that's confined like that can't sell the products that they produce?
I believe there's some sort of a fish cooperative. I don't know.
Are you going to appear in front of the Fisheries Commission? Yeah, I do appreciate that. And Jeff, you may have a comment as well to that, if you would.
Well, not only with the uncertainty to the business model, but you're waiting longer to get less money. We've seen that with our own eyes in 2007 when we had the great displeasure of seeing our barley freedom yanked away at the last minute by Her Honor in Alberta. The price of barley dropped several dollars a ton overnight. It took until the big commodity run of 08 to recoup half of the market that was lost. I mean, we're getting less money. The cost to the system through logistics and just personal business relationships. I want to deal with people that want to deal with me on a level playing field, on a playing field where I feel we're both advantaged equally. And I find the Wheat Board is often more of an unnecessary third party than it is a benefit to my farm.
Okay. To Mr. Stanford, now both of you actually talked, I believe, about the advantages of certified seed and how we promote that. The dollar, remind us again, the dollar value of increased production through using certified seed, and what are the disadvantages? Why aren't we using it now?
True.
Whoever would like to comment on that.
Yeah. This is from a George Morris Center study, which was commissioned to specifically look at what would happen if we increased the use of certified seed and how much money would flow and accrue. And so the George Morris Center, looking at if we had 155% tax credit and we moved to full use of certified seed, like Quebec does, if you're a farmer in Quebec and you want to be in crop insurance, you plant certified seed. So in this case, I think Quebec is well ahead of the rest of Canada. So. We would see an increased farm income from the study of $170 million a year, over $60 million in tax varieties, and a return to the economy of just over $600 million. That is only for the 8 most recent varieties. We have probably over 100 varieties of the various crops. That's just from the 8 varieties. There's huge gains to be made by moving in this direction. And a lot of that money flows back to the public sector researchers. Like if you're an Ag Canada researcher and you develop a variety, you go to CCAN, which is a farmer cooperative, they mark out and they sell it, but the money flows back into those researchers, so it would go back to both public and private sector. But the public sector has a lot to gain in this as well as the private sector.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Menzies. Ms. Davies, you have 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and thank you to the witnesses for coming today. I just wanted to follow up the comments and ask some questions based on the presentation from the Cooperative Housing Federation. And first of all, I just want to agree with you that I think it's very, very concerning that we have what potentially is a looming disaster with 600,000 social housing units, including cooperative housing, that will be coming to the end of their operating agreements and funding arrangements. I've actually seen the letter that's come from the minister, because people have been raising it with me, certainly co-ops and social housing facilities in my own community, but elsewhere across Canada, and I've seen the response that's come from the minister. And I mean, all it says is that that we're looking at options. It doesn't even say whether or not these operating agreements will be continued. It doesn't say whether or not you'll be involved in it. So I think it is something that we should be very concerned about because, I mean, notwithstanding the fact that we don't have enough affordable housing now, and the figure that I use is about 3 million Canadians who are in need of affordable housing, but this is housing we've already got. This is housing that was funded through previous programs and arrangement, and if we lose this, or we see mass evictions because co-ops or social housing basically can't maintain the subsidies that they have or the operating agreements, then we're in big trouble. So I just wondered, I mean, you're saying that the government should study this, which I guess that's fine, but I just wonder if you're actually putting forward some sort of suggestions or a direction of how we need to address this, because we're talking about next few years, I believe, even within 5 years that these agreements will be up and we'll face a crisis. So if you could just respond to that in terms of what more specifically we should be ensuring that we do.
Well, I think first of all, we have to recognize the value that these housing assets represent. It costs a lot of money to develop new housing. It costs a lot less money for the public to support existing community housing assets that were built a generation ago and that probably need reinvesting in now, but still represent a very good deal. So our proposal is that the governments, if you like, make sure that these projects are able to continue to house at least as many low-income Canadians after their present funding arrangements come to an end as they can do now, because otherwise we'll just suffer a real setback in housing need. I agree with your estimate, Ms. Davies, on the 3 million. What we don't want to see is that number grow merely by dint of existing social housing assets, if you like, going to waste. The other concern that we have is that absent some renewed commitment from government, some renewed partnership arrangement with government, that we might see just simply the loss of some of these assets, either the loss due to the failure to reinvest in them, or even the loss at the hands of unscrupulous groups who might wish to convert these assets into equity housing. This is housing that the Canadian taxpayers have paid for over a generation and should remain available. So we're saying maintain the purposes and maintain the affordability as it is now.
Okay, and just a further question. I mean, we're talking about the existing housing, but because this is the Finance Committee, I think there's a very good case to be made that an investment in affordable housing is not only meeting a critical social need in our country, a very basic human need for people to know that they have housing security, but it's also a great economic investment. We're hearing presentations from the Canadian forest products. We look at all the lumber that we're shipping overseas. I mean, this is something that could be a further made in Canada success story. So I just wonder if you could spend a couple of minutes talking about the economic investment and the impact, the positive impact that has in terms of, basically good jobs when you build housing, and what the economic indicators are of that in terms of the investment.
Well, I spoke earlier on in my brief about the general impact that good housing has on an economy and the kinds of other costs that it may reduce. But if you want to look at the actual construction of housing itself or its renovation, it's an incredibly effective way to invest if you want economic activity. After manufacturing, housing construction and renovation has the biggest multiplier effect. In other words, for every job that's created directly, the indirect job creation is one of the most efficient in the country. And as you say, it does put Canadian suppliers together with Canadian developers and builders. There's no question that building new affordable housing does cost money, but I find it quite interesting, for example, it's the Conference Board of Canada, which is not known for its sort of, communist leanings, together with other sort of notable spokespeople like Don Drummond, the economist for TD, who have said numerous times that an investment in housing is an investment in the economy. And whether it's putting people closer to jobs, whether it's the multiplier effect of construction jobs, whether it's a happier, healthier, better housed community, Fact of the matter is that people who are housed well work well.
Okay.
1 minute.
Okay, I know in BC we have a study that we use that on the flip side to show that the cost of keeping a person homeless is about $55,000 a year, so it's very high. So that's just the other side, and I think you made that point. But anyway, I hope that we will, keep the pressure up about at least the existing housing that we have, because otherwise, I agree with you, we're going to have a terrible crisis of people facing eviction, and then we're just going to see a greater crisis in terms of affordable housing in this country. So thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Davies. We'll go to Mr. Szabo for a 5-minute round.
Thank you. To the Canadian Bankers Association, I've been working with the document from August, and I'm particularly in the area of personal income tax measures. Delaying the age at which RRSPs are converted to a payout mode like RIFs, and I guess combine that with the second one, adjustments or elimination of minimum annual withdrawal amounts from RIFs in view of the lower investment returns, because you're taking them out of one instrument that may be all consolidated in something. How does this tie into the objectives of the government to address the deficit?
Well, I think, Mr. Szabo, our recommendation here was to look at a number of linkages, as you can see here, and we actually, if it's useful to you, we have a larger, more extensive paper that we can provide, which we have done on specifics around retirement income. I mean, I think the point here is to review all of these possibilities, linkages, not necessarily to drive towards a silver bullet, but to definitely have the focus, and I think we all probably have the focus, of encouraging more Canadians to save. So that was the intent of this particular recommendation.
Okay. If I may, let me just get the other couple in here. The third one here was a lifetime rather than an annual contribution limit on tax-free savings accounts, which would seem to provide an instrument for those that had significant cash flow availability for investment to top up much quicker, and that the skew would be a benefit to higher income earning Canadians versus low. And the fourth item was, and this is one I'm not sure, but it says equity in the amount of tax deferral room provided in and tax treatment of retirement income from various types of deferred tax plans. I assume an RRSP would be something in that basket, and I assume that this is an indirect way of saying increase the limits on our RRSPs. I went through this because it just struck me that very few of these things really had anything to do with addressing the deficit, which I think is the Canadian Bankers Association's position that is important for us to address the deficit as early as possible. Is that the fact?
Mr. Szabo, we have not dealt in our submission anywhere with timing with respect to reducing the deficit, so I don't think you can derive that from anything. I think the point about this suggested review of the income tax system, and as I said, I can provide you with more detail on this, is that Canadians, particularly Canadian families, have at different times in their lives different capacities to save, and it may be very, very restricted in their early years, and it may be better in later years. And so the whole notion here is to try to get more flexibility into the retirement system that you have more people participating and being able to participate over their lifespan.
Okay, I understand that, but I can tell you that your suggestion here that we look at lifetime TFSA versus an annual limit really doesn't make much sense, since everything is carried forward anyway, and you can catch up at any time you want. So the point that you put in here doesn't belong. So let me go back to the question I asked in the first place. Has to do with the bank's view, and I don't think I mentioned a time limit. I'm not trying to attribute anything to you, but the importance of dealing with the deficit in the context of your apparent support for the corporate income tax reductions to continue forward. And which really works against dealing with the deficit. So can you confirm the banking association's position on the importance of dealing with the deficit and how you rationalize supporting a corporate tax?
Ms. Hughes Anthony, you have about 20 seconds.
Okay. Our members feel very strongly that the reduction in corporate income tax should not be delayed, that it is legislated, it is anticipated, it is a very strong driver of revenue, and indeed, one can say it's going to pay for itself over time in terms of increased tax revenue. And so in that context, we are very supportive of continuing with these tax reductions to ensure that we are creating the jobs, we are making incentives for Canadian and international companies to invest here, and therefore, at the end of the day, I would like to think bringing in more revenue.
Okay, thank you. Monsieur Carrier, pour 5 minutes.
Merci. Mr. Carrier for 5 minutes. Thank you. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My question is for Mr. Lazar concerning forest products. I suppose that when you say that you represent the industry of forestry products, the softwood lumber products, indeed, all industry products, I'm surprised that in your presentation I took good note that you were not asking for additional funding, and when I read your document you expressed certain wishes. It seems that the Forest Products Association's situation doesn't seem too dramatic, but the Director General of Quebec Forest Products Association has appeared on a number of occasions in Parliament asking us for loan guarantees in order to ensure the survival of this industry, which is dying out in a number of regions. Thousands of jobs have been lost in Quebec, the area I know best, and I don't see that sense of urgency in your document. And I also seem to recall that in the last year, in the Economic Action Plan, the government allocated $10 billion to serve the automotive industry, investment that was justified and we agreed with. But there was only $170 million for the forest industry across Canada, which to us seemed insufficient. And so I'd like to hear you about that, since you represent that industry. Yes, most of the industry in Quebec is part of my organization. There are two perspectives for the future of the industry. First, we have to ensure that the survival of the industry, and of course, we don't want any change. We don't want to lose our what we have now. But if we have to work with the foreign markets and we sell most of our products abroad, but we have to adapt to those markets. We have to adapt to their economies. And that's why more effort must be put into transforming the industry, because the future of our municipalities and our jobs and our rural regions depend on that transformation. And as for the loan guarantees, that could be useful. But it could cause a lot of problems with the U.S. and the softwood lumber agreement. But we need an actual change in the industry. We need to transform the industry to green technology. It will reduce our costs and it will change our profile. And so what we need are new products. For instance, nanocrystalline cellulose. And we have to export that to China. And that'll change the future of the industry. Well, I agree with your views. But at the Thurso plant, recently the plant was transformed to produce rayon, which is made from forest products. But the plants are nevertheless calling for loan guarantees. They have no more money. They're on the verge of bankruptcy. if you're a boss of a plant, naturally you'll ask the government to save your plant, and I respect that. But you also have to ask, what is the role for the government to play, and a role that can be justified for the future? If we don't save each and every plant, of course, the plants that go down will be affected. But if we can have a single profitable and world leader plant instead of 3 that are unprofitable, what option should we prefer? 30 seconds. I have a brief question for Mr. Gazard with regard to affordable housing. I agree with your policies and your requests. I wanted to know what you think of our bill, which we introduced last week, calling for the CMHC surpluses of $8 billion, calling for them at least $4 billion be used to invest in affordable housing. That's a complex question. I think you have to consider that in the context. Well, for me, it's difficult to separate the mandate of the CMHC with the government's current situation. So I don't really have a very formed opinion in that regard. Thank you.
If you have any further information on that, or if you want to provide a future response, please feel free to do so. If you do have a position as an organization in the future, please feel free to provide that to the committee. We'll now go to Ms. Block, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'll just be asking one question and would be happy to share my time with you. My questions will be for the Green Growers of Canada and the Western Canadian Wheat Growers Association. And after having lived in rural Saskatchewan for 19 years, I truly do appreciate your mandate to advance the development of a profitable and sustainable agriculture industry, as well as your belief that government does not owe farmers a living, but the farmers deserve a policy environment that will allow them to make a living. My question really quick. This week we will be voting for C-474 to extend the time to review it, and I'd ask that you'd be really short in your answer in terms of what do you think of C-474 and the impact it's going to have on agriculture?
On Bill 474, we appreciate where Mr. Adamanenko is coming from, but I would have to say that probably every farm group that's appeared before this committee would be staunchly opposed to 474 and where it's going. I'll just leave it at that.
Any further comments? Mr. Gus?
I don't think you could kill it fast enough. It's completely illogical to have bureaucrats or legislators from other parts of the world telling us how we should do things. If customers have one thing, they can come to us directly, but as a trading nation, we have to be able to deal with science and do things properly.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Block. Mr. Patry, I just wanted to ask one simple question. You've pointed out that successive governments have supported the CFI. In fact, it was a former government that established it, and I would certainly credit them for that. But can you just identify for the committee how many resources have put in since 2006 into the CFI to continue its important work?
Yes, I can do this. There's been, I think, 3 investments totaling $1.3 billion since 2007.
2007.
Yes.
Okay, I appreciate that information for the committee. I don't have much time, but I did want to ask Mr. Lazar, we did actually go to the Domtar facility in Kamloops, and we learned firsthand of the importance of the Green Transformation Program, which addresses the black liquor issue. I just did want to ask about the accelerated CCA. I know it's not in your brief, but you and I have worked on this in the past. It's been raised by another group here. Mr. Lazar, you know what the Finance Department is going to say and what the Privy Council Office is going to say, and what economists across this country will say is that we say it's deferred taxation. They will say, well, in fact, it's a subsidy that goes to business, and therefore we ought not to do it. In fact, we ought to phase it out. So what I'd like you to do in the 2 minutes I have remaining is to respond very directly to the concerns that you know that they will raise if this committee chooses to recommend it as a policy idea?
I want to be very clear that if you're sitting in the kitchen of an average Canadian family, their worry is not about the deficit and it's not about the stimulus, it's about can we compete. And government will not allow us to compete. It's going to be business investment. And so if we care about people having jobs in this country, we want to invite business investment in. And we want to invest in Canadian facilities. And the simplest, most leveraged, most powerful way to get people to invest in Canadian factories, in Canadian industrial infrastructure, is to give them a fast return on their investment by not taxing it quickly, but allowing the depreciation to go quickly. You know, capital is mostly traveling internationally. If you've got a pool of capital, and I face this all the time with my companies, they're multinationals, they got a small pool of capital, shall I put it into my mill in Georgia? Should I pull it to my mill in France? Should I put it into my mill in Brazil? And what they do is they add up the speed of return. Nobody can afford to wait. If we had an extended accelerated capital depreciation, the numbers shift. They invest in Canadian facilities, and then we have jobs over the long term. If people don't invest in Canadian facilities, there's nothing government can do to make us competitive. So I'd be happy to work with you, Mr. Chairman, on the details and the technical aspects. Is this a subsidy, or is it just reducing a tax grab by government? But the more important question is, how do you keep jobs in the country unless you bring money, investment money in? And I think it's a no-brainer. We need industry investment, we need private investment to replace the stimulus if we're going to keep growing our economy. And extending it year by year, frankly, is just not good enough. We should see a 5-year permanent extension so people have confidence in investing in this country.
I appreciate that, and we would certainly appreciate any information you have in terms of investments that have been made in the sector since that policy change was made, as in order to bolster the argument to continue the policy. I want to finish. Mr. Pachetti, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just, I guess you saved the best for last, so I'm just going to be. I want to first thank all the witnesses for appearing. It's always a challenge for us, and so I guess I'm just going to do a little bit of cleanup. I'm just going to ask my questions to the Polytech's people, Ms. Robinson. Just 2 questions. I'll start with the first one. Explain to me what is the difference between, for example, yourself and the Canadian Foundation for Innovation and the members that you're dealing with, and why your institutions are needed so in order to avoid duplication of the monies that's being distributed to your founding members? Because I see here you're getting money from the social sciences, and I think you're also getting from the Canadian Foundation, I believe.
Thank you for your question. Polytechnics Canada doesn't get a cent from any of these councils. We represent colleges that can compete and then on a competitive basis obtain funding from a variety of sources. There is a difference between the 3 federal research granting councils in Canada. That would be the Natural Sciences, Social Sciences, and Canadian Institutes of Health Research that fund the research activity, and the Canada Foundation for Innovation, whose president is here, that funds the research equipment, infrastructure, and facility. Polytechnics Canada does not get any of that funding to
But all your members will request money from the 3 founding organizations?
In different kind of competitive projects partnered with industry, often, as CFI has explained, leveraged with, other sources of funding, institutional or private sector, for different kinds of purposes. So if you've got a project that's trying to do an IT technology, you go to NSERC. But if you're trying to study the impact of better business practices in a certain sector, you'd go to social sciences. They're different tools.
So are your members happy with the way the system works presently?
Well, we are happier than we would be a decade ago when college research was not funded at all by any federal department or granting council. We are new players, we are new entrants, and we are very glad for the little recognition there is. But the balance is something over time that needs to be rectified.
Okay, so then the magic question is going to be, is with all this money that's going in, I think Mr. Lazar was speaking about a little bit, and it's one of the criticisms that this committee has had, all this money that's going into research, how do we determine whether we're getting a return on the money, speaking for Canadian taxpayers? And secondly, how do we increase productivity in this country? I mean, we are putting money in research. Why is it not showing up in our stats? So what's the next step? I know that there's a need to improve on the commercialization. That's been one aspect, but I'd just like to hear your comments on those two aspects.
Well, the chair will tell me how many seconds I have left to answer. I have 2 minutes?
2 minutes.
Okay. You've asked many very, very fundamental
questions. Well, basically, what's the return? How do we evaluate that? And how can we improve productivity from a Canadian standpoint? Because that's been one of the criticisms that we've had.
The federal government, I think, is beginning to consider that, yes, the ROI, the return on investment, needs to be looked at, which is why it has recently created an expert panel on business innovation. I can only speak about the inputs and the outputs of my members.
That's what I want you to speak about.
And that's what we have been tracking year on year now for 2 or 3 years, where I believe that we are seeing, first of all, the private sector investment in our colleges growing. In fact, our data shows that it has grown by about 120% last year from year to year. We've gone from $3 million to over $7.5 million of private sector, small companies coming to our colleges to invest in what we're doing. So I think we do have to move from a mentality that keeps demanding input dollars without showing the outputs. I agree. There are 6 outputs that we think are important to measure the work we do. How many students are involved? How many faculty are involved? How many prototypes have you created? Not patents, because scientific research is measured by patents and trademarks. We actually are in the business of late-stage commercialization. How many prototypes, how many processes have we improved? How many studies have we done to do cost avoidance so that companies can actually avoid market failure? We're into that valley of death. So we measure 6 of our outputs. How many collaborations do we have with universities as well as the private sector? And how many clients have we served?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Pichetti. Thank you, Ms. Robinson. Thank you. I want to thank all the witnesses for being here today. I did have a request from a member, Ms. Hughes Anthony. There was, I believe you referenced a report regarding personal income tax proposals. If you could submit that to the clerk, I'll ensure all members of the committee get a copy of that report. But I did want to thank you for coming in. Merci beaucoup pour vos présentations, vos réponses.
Thank you for your presentations and answers.